Hey everyone, welcome back to Paranormal M, and thanks for being here tonight. Before we get into the first story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos. Tonight's first story is about a couple on a road trip who stopped in Diamond Fork Canyon, Utah, just looking for a place to rest for the night. But after finding an old battle memorial and hearing something strange in the dark, the whole night took on a very different feeling. I hope you enjoy the story, get comfortable, and sleep well tonight. I want to tell you about something that happened to me in the summer of 2020. My partner Eli and I were driving from Colorado up to Boise, Idaho, to visit his family and join them for a camping trip. It's a long haul, about 15 hours, and after spending most of the day in the car, we were itching to get out and move around. Since I'd lived in Utah before, I was excited to show him one of my favorite places, the hot springs near Spanish Fork. They're tucked deep in Diamond Fork Canyon, and getting there means a good hike from the parking area, close to 45 minutes or so. But after 7 hours on the road, that actually sounded perfect to us. When we got to the first parking lot, though, the gate was locked shut. There was a sign posted on it saying the springs were closed, no access allowed, with a pretty steep fine if anyone ignored it. We were so disappointed. At that point, so many places had shut down because of COVID, but we really thought an outdoor spot like that might still be open. Later, after checking online, we found something unsettling. There had apparently been reports that a body was found near the springs, which may have been why the whole area was closed off. So instead of soaking in the springs, we drove back down the canyon looking for somewhere to camp for the night. A lot of the official campsites were either closed or already full, which honestly didn't bother us too much. We've always liked dispersed camping better anyway. We ended up turning onto this random side road, Road 338, just to see where it led. Most of it was a decent dirt road. We passed a few nice spots by a creek, and there were maybe a couple other campers already settled in for the night. But we kept going because sometimes you just get this feeling that the right campsite is still a little farther ahead. Eventually the road ended, and off to the right there was a fire road branching off. Right there at the turn was this strange boulder, partly enclosed by a little wooden fence with an inscription carved into it. Of course I had to go look. It said, "Diamond Battle, June 20th, 1866. The second I read it, everything shifted. I remember feeling this wave of uneasiness, but also respect. Just standing there, realizing that something violent and important had happened on that land, it stayed with me. We drove a little farther up the fire road, but nothing really stood out, so we doubled back and chose one of the creekside spots we'd passed earlier. It was getting dark fast by then, but we got the tent up quickly and started a fire. The creek was loud enough to fill the silence, but in a peaceful way. Still, ever since I'd seen that memorial, I couldn't shake this strange feeling. I'm not usually a nervous person, but I felt alert in a way I couldn't explain. It was like something was watching us from the trees across the water. Not threatening exactly, just present. And as it got darker, that feeling only got stronger. After a while, I told myself I was just tired and a little spooked, but I decided I didn't want to sit out in the open anymore. So I went into the tent to try to sleep, while Eli stayed by the fire a little longer. I curled up into the sleeping bag and started listening to the sounds around me. The creek seemed quieter from inside the tent, softer somehow. I was just on the edge of sleep when I heard it. Soft chanting. Then drums. My eyes flew open. I lay there completely still, trying to listen harder over the sound of the water. I couldn't make out every detail, but I know I heard it. And then I realized the ground felt like it was trembling too, like horses were moving down the road, not far from where we were camped. I remember thinking I should get out and tell Eli, but I also had this overwhelming feeling that if I said it out loud, it would become too real. like I'd be acknowledging something ancient that had already made itself known. Before I could decide what to do, I fell asleep, and somehow, it was one of the most peaceful nights of sleep I've ever had. The next morning, we packed up, cleaned everything carefully, and left no trace behind. Once we got back into cell service, I looked up the memorial and started reading about Diamond Fork. That's when I learned there really had been a battle there, between the Ute people and Mormon militia, and lives were lost on that mountainside. When I finished reading, I finally told Eli what I'd heard the night before. The chanting, the drums, even what sounded like horses. He just stared at me and said he'd heard the same thing. He told me that not long after I went into the tent, he got uneasy standing there alone by the fire. Then he started hearing the distant drumming and chanting too, and it scared him enough that he came inside. And just like me, once he was in the tent, he slept deeply and peacefully. I still think about that night. What I felt there wasn't cruel or angry. It felt strong, calm, and protective. Almost as if the spirits of those who lost their lives on that land were still there, watching, remembering, and maybe even watching over the people who passed through with respect. So if you ever find yourself on Diamond Fork Road, I hope you stop and visit that memorial. I hope you stand there quietly for a moment and pay your respects. And maybe, if the land chooses to let you feel it, you'll understand exactly what I mean. So, I need to tell you what's been happening because honestly, it's started to get under my skin. For about the last couple of weeks, my sleep has been completely off. No matter whether I'm going to bed for the night or just taking a short nap, I keep having these really vivid dreams where I feel trapped. It's like I know I'm dreaming and I'm trying so hard to wake myself up, but I just can't. When I finally do come to, I feel awful, heavy, groggy, almost like I'm coming out of anesthesia. And the weirdest part is I've been sleeping way longer than usual, like 10 to 12 hours sometimes, when normally I'm more of a 6 to 8 hour person. The dreams themselves have been unsettling too. A lot of them take place in places from when I was younger, but everything feels wrong in them. Familiar, but twisted. Off. Like something's there that shouldn't be. Then my older sister Marissa told me something that really shook me. A few days ago, she was walking past my room while my door was open, and she noticed, out of the corner of her eye, that something inside my room was moving at the same pace as she was. At first, she thought it was me, but then she realized it wasn't. She said it looked like me, but like an older version of me, back when I had long hair years ago. She told me it was looking at her in this strange way, almost like it was studying how to move, like it was trying to copy her walk and figure out how to do it right. She said she saw it twice that same day. Both times, it felt like it was mocking her movements. She brushed it off at first, but then she came into the kitchen, saw me there, and told me immediately because she knew something wasn't right. And then last night, things got even worse. I stayed over at my boyfriend's house, and before I settled in, I texted my younger sister Mia because her room is across from mine. I asked her to make sure my bedroom door was shut since I wasn't home. She didn't answer right away because her phone was on Do Not Disturb. Later, when she got home, she walked down the hall toward her room. She was being kind of noisy, keys clanking against her water bottle, the kind of sound that usually would have annoyed me if I'd been asleep. She said right then she heard my bedroom door open. And just as she got close to her own room, she heard a voice whisper, "What are you doing?" She said she immediately thought it was me, irritated that she was making so much noise. So she looked up, moving her hair out of her face, expecting to see me standing there. But my door was open, and no one was there. She rushed into the bathroom, grabbed her phone, and that's when she saw my text from about 20 minutes earlier, asking her to shut my door because I wasn't even home. She was terrified. She called me right away, and and we started FaceTiming. My boyfriend was joking around about it at first, but I told him to stop. I didn't want him making fun of whatever this is. I know that sounds dramatic, but I meant it. The whole thing felt wrong. Then, all of a sudden, the FaceTime call just ended. Not like a normal failed call, not frozen, not glitchy. It just beeped on both ends, like one of us had hung up. I thought maybe her phone had died, but almost immediately she texted me asking, "Did your phone die?" And I told her no, because I thought hers had. That's what scared me most. Neither of us ended the call. And now I can't shake this feeling that something is in my room. The energy in there feels heavy and uncomfortable, like I'm being watched. My sleep has been so abnormal, and when I do manage to wake up, it feels like something is pulling me right back under again. I don't know what this thing is, or why it seems to be imitating me. I don't know if it's just some strange presence, something attached to the room, or something darker. I've tried looking for answers, and haven't found anything that really matches what's been happening. I'm telling you because I honestly don't know what to make of it anymore. And at this point, I just want to understand what could possibly be going on. You know how some places feel tucked outside the regular world? My family has a vacation house in a tiny town in Maine, the kind of place where maybe 100 people live there year-round, and everybody knows everybody else's business before breakfast. We've had that house forever, and growing up, we were there constantly, every holiday, most summer weekends, all of it. So it never felt unfamiliar to us. That is probably why what happened felt so wrong. This started a few days before Thanksgiving in 2022. We were driving up to the house, and I was riding with my mom and dad. My sister and her husband were in the car behind us. We were maybe 25 minutes away, and I was half asleep, just staring out the window, when I noticed what I first thought was a scarecrow standing off the side of the road. But then we got closer, and it was not a scarecrow. It was a man. Young, probably late 20s, maybe early 30s. He was painfully thin, with pale skin that looked almost gray in the cold light. He had long, dark hair hanging in greasy strings around his face, and he was wearing loose jeans and a dirty t-shirt, no coat, even though it was freezing out. But the worst part was the way he was standing. His arms were held out awkwardly, limp at the elbows, his head tilted to one side, and he had this expression that I still do not know how to describe without sounding dramatic. It was like he was trying to look human and almost getting it right. I said, "Oh my God," and my mom looked up from her book and asked what was wrong. I told her there was a creepy guy on the side of the road. My dad laughed and said I had probably seen a scarecrow. And for a second, I thought maybe he was right. Then my sister called me from the car behind us and said, "Did you see that guy back there?" I said, "So it was a real person?" And she said, "Yes." Chris slowed down to look at him, and he winked at us. That was the moment the mood changed. My sister is not someone who exaggerates. She is practical, grounded, annoyingly rational most of the time. So when I heard the tension in her voice, I felt it too. We got to the house without seeing him again, and later that evening my sister and I drove to a general store in the next town over to grab beer. On the way there, we saw him again, just walking along the side of the road. And here is why that terrified us. There was no possible way he should have been there. It had been less than an hour since we first saw him, and this second spot was roughly 30 miles away. He had no car. There had been nothing around him the first time. No driveway, no house, no gas station, no parked vehicle. Just woods and road. My sister kept saying, "How did he get here?" And I kept trying to talk myself into some normal explanation. but none of them sounded convincing out loud. We hurried into the store, hoping he would keep going. Instead, he came in after us. The store owner knew us well, and the second this guy stepped inside, the whole place went strangely quiet. The owner looked right at him and said, "Can I help you, son?" In that tone people use when they already know something is off. The guy just stood in the doorway, staring blankly ahead. The owner asked again, louder this time, and finally the man turned and said, "No," in this low, flat voice, then walked right back out. The owner asked if we knew him, and my sister told him about seeing him by the road earlier. He could tell we were rattled, so when we left, he walked us to the car himself. The guy was gone by then. We did not see him again for 2 days. Then, on the third day, my sister, her husband, and I were driving to a grocery store almost an hour away to do last-minute Thanksgiving shopping. As we passed the general store, there he was, sitting on a wooden planter box near the sign out front like he had been waiting. The second our car went by, he stood up. I turned to watch him through the back window. He started running after us. Not jogging, not shambling, running. Fast. Not impossibly fast, but wrong fast. Fast enough that all of us noticed immediately. My sister was looking in the side mirror and freaking out, so Chris hit the gas and we lost him. But the whole rest of the drive she kept talking about it, trying to make it make sense. Then we got to the grocery store. We shopped for about an hour, and right as we were checking out, my sister realized she had left the reusable bags in the car. I told her I would go get them. I walked out into the parking lot, headed toward our car, and saw him standing near a telephone pole at the edge of the lot, just watching me. I ran straight back inside. I found my sister and Chris in line and said, "He's out there." My sister thought I was joking at first. Then she saw my face. Chris got angry in that protective way people do when they are scared but do not want to admit it, and he stormed outside to confront him. By the time we finished checking out and came back out, Chris was already in the car, pale and visibly shaken. He told us to get in. When we were driving home, he finally explained what had happened. He said that as soon as he started toward the man, the guy bolted across the street and into a wooded area behind some houses. But what really scared him was not that he ran. It was how he ran. Chris said he moved in this uneven, loping, almost animal way, using his hands and feet together for a few strides, like his body did not care about the normal rules for how people are supposed to move. And Chris is in great shape. He runs all the time. He said there was no way he could have caught him. On the way back, we stopped again at the general store. The owner told us the guy had been there earlier, lingering inside for over an hour without buying anything, barely speaking, just waiting. Then, according to the owner, he had gone outside and sat on that planter box for hours, until suddenly he jumped up and sprinted off at the exact moment we drove by. That night was Thanksgiving Eve, and the whole thing had settled over us like a fog. My mom had still not seen him herself, so she thought maybe we were working ourselves up. My dad was skeptical too. He kept treating it like some eccentric drifter passing through. Then, after Thanksgiving dinner, one of our dogs started losing her mind at the back door. Now, this dog hardly ever barked unless something was truly wrong. We lived around wildlife up there: deer, coyotes, bobcats, even bears sometimes, and she never reacted like that. This was different. She was furious, alarmed, focused. The next morning, when Chris went outside to walk the dogs, he found muddy footprints around both the front and back doors. Bare footprints. No shoes, no socks. In late November, in Maine. That was the point when even my dad stopped joking. He called the sheriff, and when the deputy came out, he told us they had already gotten a few reports about a strange man in the area over the past couple of days. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody had seen him before. In a town that small, that mattered. My sister and Chris decided to head home that night, but my parents wanted to stay one more evening to tidy up before Christmas. We all tried staying awake late, half to feel in control, and half because nobody really wanted to admit they were scared. Sometime after 3 a.m., I got up for water. I was standing at the kitchen sink when I saw something near the tree line at the edge of the property. A figure, standing still, arms hanging out, head tilted. Exactly the same pose. Then the dog erupted again. My dad came running in, saw me staring out the window, grabbed the gun he kept by the back door for wildlife, and fired into the ground outside to scare whoever it was off. The figure took off into the woods immediately, and for a split second, with the motion and the darkness and the trees shaking behind it, I thought I saw that same horrible, loping run Chris had described. A deputy came later and searched around the property, but of course, he found nothing. That should have been the end of it. It was not. Before we even got home that day, our neighbor called and said the vacation house had caught fire. Someone had broken in through the back door and started a fire in the living room. It turned out to be arson. The fire department got there quickly, so the damage was not catastrophic, but it was enough. The back door glass had been smashed, and the fire had been started in an armchair using lighter fluid and one of those family photo books my mom had made online. That detail got under my skin in a way I cannot fully explain. Not just breaking in, not just setting a fire, using a book of our family pictures. My dad fixed everything quickly because my mom was absolutely determined that Christmas would still happen there. And somehow, unbelievably, it did. When Christmas came, the whole family was there. My parents, me, my sister and Chris, my aunt and uncle, their kids, my grandparents, the whole festive circus. My parents had not told everybody everything. They had downplayed the fire, downplayed the break-in, downplayed all of it, because my mom did not want the holiday ruined. That worked for maybe one day. On Christmas Eve, we were all sitting in the living room when something slammed against the back sliding glass door. My dad went to look and called out, sounding confused, "It's a bird, I think." Then he added, "It doesn't have a head." That was when my sister snapped and told everybody about the creepy man. And because I had been drinking and my judgment had packed up and left for the evening, I blurted out the rest. The footsteps, the figure in the yard, the gunshot, the arson, all of it. That turned into a huge family fight. My aunt, who is deeply into paranormal stuff, immediately started spiraling into theories. My mom was furious. My sister was furious. My poor dad was outside cleaning up a headless bird while the living room turned into chaos. Later that night, my aunt and uncle, because they are exactly the kind of people who would do this, took cameras outside and started calling into the woods, asking if anything was there. A few minutes later, something answered. It was this loud, guttural, unnatural sound from deep in the trees. I heard it from inside the house. Everybody did. My aunt and uncle came running back in. My dad insisted it was probably a deer or a moose making some weird mating call, but none of us believed that. Not really. The next day, in broad daylight, my aunt, uncle, Chris, and the dogs went into the woods behind the house. About a quarter-mile in, they found a campsite. A rough little shelter made from tarps, old sheets, pallets, and stolen outdoor cushions. Trash everywhere. Bottles, cans, cigarette butts, food wrappers. And outside the shelter, mounted like some kind of joke, was a scarecrow. It had been made from stuffed clothes and leaves. The head was an old ball with a ragged dark wig on it. And the clothes were baggy jeans and a t-shirt. Written across the shirt in marker were the words, "Creepy Guy." They also found a notebook filled with nothing but scribbles. No sentences, no drawings, just pages and pages of frantic, meaningless marks. After that, my sister and Chris left immediately. They had reached their limit. Honestly, I do not blame them. That same night, after dinner, we heard a heavy thud on the roof, then something rolling and falling off the side of the house. And right then, in the middle of all of that fear and adrenaline and tension, my dad had a heart attack. He survived. He recovered. But the whole thing felt cursed by that point, like the house had become a magnet for dread. The next morning, after we got back from the hospital, my uncle walked around outside to see what had landed on the roof. He found a squirrel in the bushes. No head. We did not tell my mom. Since then, we have barely gone back. The cameras are still there, and they still send alerts. Most of the time, it is just animals. Sometimes there is nothing visible at all, just motion detected and empty frames. My aunt and uncle lost all their footage from the trip after their luggage was damaged, which somehow feels fitting, like that whole stretch of time does not want to be pinned down or replayed cleanly. And that is the part that stays with me. Not even just the man himself, though I still see him clearly in my head sometimes. It is the feeling of him, the sense that he had chosen us somehow, or attached himself to the house, or been watching long before we realized we were being watched. I still do not know who he was. I do not know how he kept appearing miles away with no car. I do not know why he stood like that, or why he kept circling back, or whether he was just one very disturbed person, or something even harder to explain. I just know that in a tiny town where nothing goes unnoticed, a stranger appeared out of nowhere one freezing November, and for one long winter, it felt like something had stepped out of the woods and decided not to leave. I need to tell you about what's been happening to my younger sister, Marissa, because for a long time, we've felt completely lost. We didn't know what to call it, how to deal with it, or how to protect her from whatever seemed to be happening in that room. It really started back in the spring of 2021 when Marissa was 16. At first, it was sleep paralysis. She would wake up unable to move, terrified, and say it felt like something was there with her. Not long after that, we started noticing handprints on one of her bedroom walls. What made it so unsettling was that the wall had been blocked off by furniture, her TV stand, a bookshelf, a desk, even a mirror, so it wasn't the kind of place someone could casually touch. We tried to brush it off in the beginning. We moved everything back, covered the wall again, and told ourselves not to feed into the fear. But then more marks kept showing up. A couple months later, there were fresh stains. By late summer, there were new prints behind the mirror. Then, near the end of that year, more shapes appeared, and some of them looked almost like a face or some kind of figure. Even saying that still makes me uneasy. There was also one moment that really shook all of us. Her desk somehow tipped over toward her while she was standing away from it, nowhere near close enough to have bumped it. It had been pushed against the wall and felt secure. After that, our dogs would not go into her room without trembling. They acted so anxious around that space that it became impossible to ignore. All through that year, the sleep paralysis kept happening, sometimes several times a month. Marissa told me she heard a deep male voice talking to her during those episodes. It would say cruel things, telling her no one could help her, that she couldn't get rid of it, that she was alone. Hearing her describe that was heartbreaking. We were raised Catholic, so I did what I knew to do. I lit prayer candles, hung crosses, prayed over her room, and kept a rosary on her doorknob. I replaced that rosary more than once because it kept snapping. Eventually, I even started smudging the room, just trying anything that might bring her peace. I kept telling her she had to protect her mind too, because whatever this was seemed to feed on fear. By 2022, we were still trying to manage it the best we could. We covered more of the wall with posters, papers, and finally a tapestry. But even through all of that, you could still see some of the stains bleeding through. There were more marks that spring. The sleep paralysis got a little less frequent for a while, maybe every couple of months instead of every few weeks, and we were hopeful that maybe things were easing up. Then early fall came, and everything turned dark again. The paralysis got worse, and Marissa became afraid to sleep at all. She said every time she closed her eyes, that same voice would come back, threatening her, tormenting her, wearing her down. It got so bad that she would rather stay awake for days than risk falling asleep. We even had her sleep in my room, hoping it would stop if she wasn't alone. But it followed her there too. That was when I really threw everything I had at it. I smudged her room for hours, prayed over her, used holy water, and tried to remind her she wasn't helpless. She told me the voice hated the prayers, said they were useless, said I should stop. But at the same time, she told me they gave her relief. So I kept going. I kept telling her not to let it convince her that it was stronger than she was. For nearly a month, it felt like she was under attack almost every night. Then, slowly, something shifted. She started leaning on the good things around her. Our dogs, her friends, the little moments that made her feel safe again. Bit by bit, the episodes stopped, and by late 2022, things had finally gone quiet. But then in the summer of 2023, it started again. The sleep paralysis came back, and so did the marks. A new handprint appeared high up on the wall, above the tapestry, in a place no one had touched. That tapestry had been hanging there since the year before. Nobody had moved it. Nobody had been behind it. When I finally pulled it back and looked underneath, it felt like all the fear from before came rushing back. That's where we are now. We still don't know what this is or why it seems focused only on her. For a long time, I thought maybe she was vulnerable because she was younger, because she struggled emotionally at times, because maybe whatever this is sensed that. But honestly, I don't know anymore. I just know I'm scared for her. I saw what this did to her before, and I never want her to reach that point again. More than anything, I want her to feel safe in her own room, in her own mind, and in her own life. I want to tell you about something that has stayed with our family for years. Something I still think about when the world gets quiet. About 7 years ago, my mother-in-law, Marin, died very suddenly at home from a blood clot. It happened out in this very remote area where my in-laws lived, the kind of place with mostly summer cottages and only a handful of people who stayed year-round. Because they were so far out, my father-in-law had to do CPR for what felt like forever, well over half an hour, before volunteer responders got there. It took even longer for the ambulance and paramedics to arrive. The whole thing was traumatic and drawn out in a way that made it even harder to process. What makes this story even stranger is that we didn't hear it until more than 2 years after Marin passed, even though it all started not long after her death. Their home sat on a quiet bay, with houses curved around it almost like a horseshoe. The roads behind the homes were winding and indirect, and the whole area was surrounded by trees. My in-laws were close with their neighbors, and there was a footpath between the two houses. Part of it ran through the woods, but most of it had been cleared so you could walk through wildflowers, brush, and open patches of land. One night, the neighbor, who was an ER doctor, woke up in the middle of the night and saw someone on that path. He said it was Marin. But she wasn't dressed the way she normally would have been. She was wearing clothes that looked like they belonged to the early 1900s, and she seemed upset, almost frantic, like she was trying to get somewhere and couldn't figure out how. He watched her moving back and forth along the path, looking lost and deeply confused. And the odd thing is, that detail actually made sense to us. When Marin died, she had been finishing edits on a book she was writing, a biography about someone from the early 20th century. She had been completely immersed in that world. It had taken over so much of her attention and energy that seeing her dressed that way somehow fit. This neighbor wasn't the kind of person who went around telling ghost stories. He was practical, grounded, the sort of man who worked strange hours and often found himself awake in the middle of the night. But he said he kept seeing her. Not just once, but again and again over the next few months. Always outside, always on that same path, always with that same unsettled, searching energy. Then slowly, the sightings became less frequent, and eventually, they stopped. It took him nearly a year to tell his wife, and even then, only because he didn't really know what to make of it. Later, she encouraged him to tell my father-in-law. When my husband and his sister eventually heard the story, something clicked for both of them. Around the same time the neighbors stopped seeing their mother, they had each had a vivid dream only days apart. In both dreams, Marin came to them clearly and calmly. She let them know she understood that she had died. She told them she was okay, that she loved them, and that everything was going to be all right. I can't prove any of it, of course, but deep down, I believe her death was so sudden that it took time for her soul to understand what had happened. And I think once she did, once she found peace, she stopped wandering that path. So, let me tell you about something that happened when I was working at the state prison. I spent about 20 years there, from the mid-90s into the 2010s, working every shift you can imagine and dealing with just about every inmate population we had. By then, I'd heard every ghost story that floated around those halls 100 times over. Most of them I took with a grain of salt, and for the longest time, I couldn't say I had ever really had an experience of my own. Then one night changed that. It was sometime around 2005. I was a sergeant then, working a 12-hour graveyard shift in the Women's Substance Abuse Treatment Unit. The layout of that building matters, so bear with me for a second. There were 4 separate sections, numbered 1 through 4, and each one had 18 cells with 2 inmates in each. 2 sections were on one side of the building, 2 on the other. Each section had its own locked door, and those opened into a larger common area. Then that common area was separated from the front foyer by another locking sliding door. After that, there was still the front exit. So for an inmate to get all the way out, several secured doors would have to be opened first. That's important. On graveyard shift, it was just me and one other officer. We did count at 10:30 p.m., then every hour from midnight to 6 in the morning. We also had culinary workers we had to wake up for kitchen duty at 4 a.m. Usually, we'd do the 4 count a little early, clear it, and then let those workers head out just before 4:30. That night, I was in the control room with my regular partner. The control room sat right in the middle, between the north and south sides of the building. It was a little before 2 a.m. We were doing what people on a quiet overnight shift tend to do, just passing the time online in the dim glow of the monitors. We kept the control room dark so the inmates couldn't easily see in, but the common areas and sections stayed lit for safety. My 2 a.m. count was coming up, and it was my turn to make rounds. I was getting myself together, stretching a little, looking for my flashlight, the usual routine. And then I happened to glance out the control room window toward the common area on the 1-2 side. And I saw Raina. She was an inmate there. I won't use her last name, but I remember her clearly. She was a big woman, close to 6 feet tall, probably over 300 pounds. Quiet, polite, never caused trouble. Honestly, she was one of those inmates you remembered because she carried herself with a kind of gentleness. She also worked in culinary, so at first, seeing her near the sliding door didn't immediately set off alarms. Then it hit me. First, she was way too early to be going to work. Second, and more importantly, I had not opened a single cell door. The second that registered, my whole body went cold. I actually started toward the control panel to open the slider for her out of instinct, then stopped dead and thought, what the hell? I went back to the window and opened the little metal speaking port so I could ask her why she was out of her room. But when I looked again, she was gone. Just gone. I stood there for a second trying to make sense of it. Then I checked the control panel to make sure all the cell doors were still secured. They were. Every one of them. So now I'm unsettled, but I still have count to do. I head out, and the whole time I'm telling myself there has to be a reasonable explanation. I figured maybe when I got to Raina's cell, I'd find her awake and moving around. Maybe she'd tampered with the door somehow, and I'd be writing her up before sunrise. But that's not what happened. When I got to her cell, she was in bed, asleep on her side with her back to the door. I held my flashlight on her longer than I normally would, just to make sure. She never moved, never stirred. And when I checked, her cell door was locked tight. Nothing else happened that night. No sounds, no movement, nothing I could point to and say, there, that explains it. But I'll tell you this. I never settled down after that. For the rest of the shift, I had that crawling feeling in the back of my neck, like I wasn't alone, like something was just behind me every time I turned a corner. And even now, when I think back on it, the part that stays with me is simple. If Raina was asleep in her locked cell, then who was standing at that door? You know, one of the strangest places I ever lived was this old farmhouse my family rented out in rural Ohio when I was in high school. Even before we moved in, the place felt off. We had to spend days cleaning it up, and the basement was the worst part. It had a dirt floor, and down there we found this rough, homemade kennel that was absolutely filthy, covered in old animal waste. I hated going into that basement. It always gave me this heavy, uneasy feeling I could never really shake. I shared a bedroom with my sister Mara. Our room had this walk-in closet where we kept clothes, board games, sports stuff, all the usual things. On the other side of the room, there was this tiny little door that opened into a crawlspace attic. It was mostly dust, cobwebs, and a forgotten box of little tiles I sometimes used for art projects. My other sister's room, right across the hall, was laid out almost exactly the same way. We even kept a bed pushed in front of that little attic door, half joking and half serious, just to make sure nothing came creeping out of there. But the weirdest thing in our room was the closet door. Every night we'd close it before going to sleep, and every single morning it would be standing open again. We tested it over and over, tried to figure out if it was uneven or loose or if there was some trick to it, but nothing explained it. At one point, we actually took the doorknob apart so we could shut the door and remove the knob completely, thinking that would finally keep it closed. It didn't. Somehow, the door still kept opening. At night, we'd hear scratching in the walls. Now, it was an old farmhouse, so sure, maybe there were mice or something in there. That would have made the most sense. But when you're lying awake in the dark, hearing those sounds move through the walls, your mind doesn't exactly choose the comforting explanation. And it wasn't just the bedroom. Strange things kept happening all through that house. Sometimes the doorbell would ring for no reason. We lived way out in the country, with the nearest neighbor about a mile away, so it wasn't like kids were running by playing pranks. Then there was the day my whole family drove into town, and when we came back that evening, the front screen door was latched from the inside. The back door was secured too, and that one could only be locked by wedging a broomstick under the knob from inside the house. There was no way to do either of those things from outside. So there we were, standing there, realizing both doors were locked in a way that should have been impossible. We ended up forcing a window open to get inside, and when we did, our dogs were hiding under the furniture, completely terrified. Then we noticed every furnace vent in the house had been pulled up from the floor and flipped upside down. Every single one. I also saw things I still can't explain. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and see these little glowing orbs drifting around the room. And one evening, out behind the house, I saw 2 red lights moving slowly across the field. Not headlights, not flashlights, just red orbs, gliding through the dark. What makes it even stranger is that my parents didn't really talk about any of their experiences until after we moved out. But later, my mom admitted that while she was home alone during the day, she'd hear odd sounds all the time and notice things being moved. She never actually saw anything happen right in front of her, but she'd put something away, leave the room, and come back to find it sitting out again like it had never been touched. That house was, without question, the creepiest place I've ever lived. I think if I were there now, I probably wouldn't be quite as scared as I was back then. Looking back, as unsettling as it all was, I never really felt anything truly hateful there. Just watched. And that was more than enough. You know, I did not get much time with my mom when I was growing up. My dad was the steady one, the one who raised me day to day, and my mom let him take the lead. I still saw her sometimes, just not often, maybe once every few years. Back then, I did not really understand it. Now that I am older, I do. Life can get tangled fast. People mean well, and still, things slip through their hands. So this happened during one of those visits with her. I was about 9, and we were up on the California coast near this quiet stretch of beach. Earlier that day, we had stopped at a little roadside fruit stand and bought Rainier cherries, peaches, and a few other things. Her old SUV was parked nearby, and the plan was to spend the evening by the ocean and sleep there. We spent the whole day talking, snacking, and just being together. It felt easy. As the sun started going down, she pulled out a couple of flashlights and 2 plastic buckets. She had missed a lot of my firsts growing up, and I think she was always trying, in her own way, to squeeze in something memorable whenever she had the chance. That night, the adventure was hunting for big shells while the tide pulled back. At first, it felt fun and harmless. The air was damp, that salty kind of cold that sticks to your skin, and we kept getting excited every time our flashlights caught something pale in the sand. Most of it turned out to be little shells, broken bits, drift trash, nothing special. We kept going, further apart after a while, each of us scanning the shoreline. Eventually, I got frustrated. I had not found anything good, and I was tired of stopping for every tiny white speck. So I started sweeping my flashlight farther ahead, looking only for something big. Then I saw it. It was this larger, pale shape near the edge of the beach, half buried. I got so excited I started yelling for my mom and ran toward it, my bucket banging against my leg the whole way. I was sure I had finally found the shell. But when I got close, I noticed there was a big opening in it. At first, I thought it was just cracked or damaged, which honestly did not even bother me. It still seemed like an amazing find. Only then I looked harder, and the opening did not look broken. It looked clean, intentional, like it was supposed to be there. A second later, my mom came up beside me with her flashlight, and we were both just standing there, staring at this strange oval thing in the sand. She gave this short laugh and said, "It's probably just some damn paper plate," like she was trying to brush it off. Then she stepped on it, and that is when everything changed. Instead of collapsing flat, it held firm. It pushed deeper into the sand. The way it moved, made my stomach drop. Her foot disturbed the sand around it, and suddenly more of the shape showed itself. What I had thought was a hole looked a lot more like an eye socket. Wide, deep, too defined. And then, as the sand shifted, I saw two narrow slits off to one side. It all happened in seconds. My mom grabbed my hand hard and pulled me away from it, fast, back toward the dry part of the beach. I still remember the way she moved. No hesitation, just fear. Real fear. She tried to tell a nearby group what we had seen, but they were drunk or high or both, and nobody took it seriously. They kind of laughed it off. So we packed up all our stuff, left the beach, and got a motel room for the night instead. What stayed with me was this. I knew what bones looked like, even as a kid. The texture, the little pits, the way they catch light. And when she stepped on that thing, it did not bend like trash. It stayed solid. It buried itself. Then it showed that deep socket and those slits. I was convinced it was a skull of some kind. Maybe it belonged to some sea creature. Maybe there is an ordinary explanation for it. I cannot rule that out. But the part I still cannot shake is my mother's reaction. She was a grown woman, and whatever she saw scared her enough to leave immediately. And when the adult in the moment is more frightened than the child, you remember that. You carry it with you. Even now, I still think about that pale shape in the sand and wonder what, exactly, we found that night. I've had this experience stuck in my mind for years, and even now, I still can't explain it. Back when I was a teenager, I was involved in a play at a small community theater in my town. I'm not someone who jumps to paranormal conclusions. I've always been pretty skeptical of anything supernatural, and I still am. But this happened, and I've never been able to make sense of it. It was during one of our early rehearsals. We were doing a script read, sitting in a loose circle in the room, maybe a dozen of us all together. Most of us were teenagers, with a few adults there too, including the director. The theater itself had this local reputation for being haunted, which everyone seemed to know about, but I never took that seriously. While we were reading, I happened to glance up, and that's when I saw them. There were these strange silver spheres hanging in the air near the ceiling. I'd say there were around 10 of them, maybe a few more. They were arranged in a rough ring above us, almost echoing the circle we were sitting in below. They weren't bright or glowing exactly, just this muted metallic silver, like old holiday ornaments that had lost some of their shine. Each one looked maybe 2 or 3 inches wide. They were suspended somewhere below the ceiling, not all at the exact same height, and they were drifting downward very slowly. Barely moving, really. Just enough that I could tell they were descending. I remember blurting out something like, "What is that?" and pointing up at them. I expected at least one other person to react, but nobody did. Nobody seemed to see anything. I tried explaining what I was looking at, and everyone just looked confused. As they kept floating lower, I got up to look more closely at one of them. The nearest one had dropped to about eye level. I brought my hand close to it, not touching it, just seeing what would happen. But there was nothing. No warmth, no change in the air, no reflection from my hand on its surface. And it didn't respond to me at all. It just kept drifting downward at the same slow pace. Then I moved around it a little, trying to understand what I was seeing. That's one of the parts that still unsettles me the most. It really seemed to occupy actual space in the room. It wasn't like a floater in your vision, or a trick of the light that shifts when you move your eyes. As I changed position, it stayed where it was, fixed in space except for that gradual descent. It felt real in a physical sense, even though I couldn't interact with it. And all the while, I kept asking the others, "You seriously can't see this?" I was pointing right at it, just inches from my hand, and every single person acted like there was nothing there. Then, after maybe a minute, the spheres started disappearing. Not all at once, one by one. Each of them just sort of crackled away or fizzled out until there was nothing left. I told the group they were gone, sat back down, and tried to act normal. But honestly, I felt embarrassed and shaken. I still don't know what I saw that day. I've tried to explain it in every ordinary way I can, and nothing quite fits. That's what stays with me. Not that it felt supernatural, but that it felt real, and I was the only one who could see it. Back in early 2002, my wife, our 4 kids, and I moved into this house that had been built sometime in the early 70s. It felt like a dream for us then. 4 bedrooms, a big fenced backyard, plenty of room for the kids to run wild. It really seemed like the perfect family place. For the first few years, though, my wife and daughters kept mentioning little things that didn't make much sense. Cabinet doors would be hanging open when nobody remembered touching them. Things would turn up in strange spots. I remember one time the decorative bowl from the dining table somehow ended up in the basement bathroom. Another time, my wife's paperback, the one she always kept on her nightstand, turned up in a basket of clean towels. I kept brushing it off. I figured it had to be the kids fooling around, or somebody moving something absent-mindedly and forgetting about it later. Then it started getting harder to explain. My youngest daughter began talking about this little man she said lived under the stairs. She described him as grouchy, sometimes angry. One day, she told us she'd seen him shouting at a tall, dark shape floating in the hallway outside the girls' room. I remember hearing that and thinking, kids dream up all kinds of things. That had to be all it was. But then one night, I heard my wife yell from the garage. She'd been out there folding laundry, and when I got to her, she looked completely shaken. Pale, unnerved, the whole bit. She told me she'd turned around and almost walked right into this dark figure standing behind her. She said it seemed human-shaped, just black and shadowy, and when she spun around, it slipped backward into the darkness. I stayed out there and finished the laundry for her, but I didn't see a thing. After that, more strange stuff kept happening, and still, somehow, never to me. At that point, I figured maybe I should stop dismissing everybody. My wife wanted to sage the house, so we did. And honestly, things got quiet for about a week. Then one evening, I was home alone. My wife and the kids were out, and I walked into the kitchen to grab a soda from the fridge. I shut the door, turned around, and there it was. A tall, black, human-shaped figure standing maybe 10 feet away from me. I actually rubbed my eyes because I thought, no, this can't be real. But it was still there, slowly moving across the room. And for whatever reason, instead of being scared, I got mad. I just said, out loud, to the empty kitchen, "Fantastic, so we've got a ghost. Now I'm gonna have to burn this house down and salt the whole earth just to be safe." I reached for a glass, looked away for maybe a second, and when I turned back, it was gone. Just like that. And here's the strangest part. We lived in that house another 5 years after that, and nobody in the family ever saw it again. So now, whenever somebody tells me they think they've got a ghost, I always tell them the same thing. Forget sage, just loudly threaten to burn the place down and salt the earth. Worked for me. So, I've been living in this house for a little over a year now, with my dad and my grandmother. It's an old place, easily close to 2 centuries old, maybe more. It has 2 main floors, plus a basement, and this huge attic that feels like its own world. My room is still set up on the second floor for now, but it's tiny, so the plan is to move me up into the attic once it's finished. The attic is the part that really gets to me. There's this old section up there, almost like a hidden room that stretches around part of the attic. Not all the way around, but far enough that it feels bigger than it should. Since we're renting, the landlord, this elderly man named Mr. Halden, left a lot of his old belongings back there. Stuff like faded portraits in heavy gold frames, an antique cradle that looks straight out of a nightmare, and this rusted old furnace sitting in the corner. It's the kind of room that makes you uneasy the second you step into it. And the strangest part is, that room is always warm. Even in the middle of winter, when the rest of the attic feels cold and still, that back room stays oddly heated. It doesn't make sense. What really unsettles me, though, is what happens late at night. The attic barely gets any airflow. When the door is shut, there's practically none. Even with it open, it's not much. The windows are painted or glued shut. There are no fans, no vents doing anything useful. Just this weak little draft from somewhere you can't really trace. And still, sometimes in the early hours of the morning, it sounds like something is scratching from inside that attic room. Not outside the door, inside. Sometimes the door even seems to move slightly with it. I've tried to explain it away. The hinges in this house are old and unreliable. We do have cats, but they never go in there. They won't even linger near the attic for long. Anytime they get close, they back off like they want nothing to do with it. Then there was the closet. I was walking toward my bedroom one day, and across from it there's this storage room nobody really uses. On my right, there's a small closet against the wall. Out of nowhere, the door slowly started to open on its own. I mean slowly, with that long, creaking squeak that old wood makes when it shifts. That room has no breeze, no open window, nothing that should have moved it. The closet itself is tiny, just a few hanging clothes and some old bags inside. I remember staring at it for a second and then deciding, honestly, that I just didn't want to know. And then there are the doors. One afternoon, my friend came over while I was home alone. We were waiting for my mom to pick us up so we could head to the pool before the rest of my family got back. Everything felt normal. My bedroom door was wide open, my grandmother's door was cracked like it usually was, and my dad's room was open too. We were just gathering our things, getting ready to leave, when my grandmother's door suddenly slammed shut. Not drifted, not crept, slammed. My friend saw it happen before I even turned around. When I looked back, the door was fully closed. And just to be clear, those doors are heavy. They're tall, solid hardwood, thick enough that you really have to push them to get them moving. There's no way a little draft could have shut it like that, especially not in a house with such poor airflow. And we were completely alone. Another night, I was lying on my bed when my own door suddenly jerked open a few inches. At the time, I brushed it off. My door has the worst hinges in the house, so I figured maybe it had shifted, or maybe one of the cats had nudged it. But later, I remembered something that still bothers me. We have motion sensor lights by the stairs, and one of them is directly outside my room. It's extremely sensitive. If anything passes near that doorway, even by a foot or so, the light comes on. That time, it stayed dark. No light, no sound from a cat, just the door moving open on its own. And now that I'm thinking about it, those lights have switched on by themselves before too. I know old houses make noise. I know wood settles, hinges slip, and people can scare themselves when they're already uncomfortable in a place. I really do know that. But living here has given me too many moments that feel harder to explain than they should be. It's like the house is always doing something small, just enough to make you question what you saw, or what you heard. or whether you really want to go up into the attic alone again. I want to tell you a little about the house I grew up in, because I think the history of it matters. My family moved in around 2009, not long after my great-grandmother passed away. Before that, we had been living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment, so moving into this place felt like a huge change for all of us. The house had belonged to my dad's side of the family for a long time, especially my great-grandparents, and there was already so much history sitting in those walls before we ever unpacked a single box. And when I say the house is old, I really mean old. During renovations in the kitchen and the upstairs bathroom, we found an ancient cast iron pipe hidden inside one of the walls. A lot of the wiring is outdated too, the kind that makes you wonder how everything is still running without sparks flying. The whole place has always felt like it's carrying the weight of 100 years. The first strange thing I remember happened when I was a kid, probably 8 or 9. It was a school night, and I was lying in bed, right on the edge of falling asleep. My closet door was open, and out of nowhere, I heard a little girl's voice say, very clearly, "Hello." Not faintly, not like I imagined it. I mean clear, like someone was standing right there in my room. I froze. Then I panicked. The only woman in the house that night was my mom, and I didn't have a sister or anyone else who could explain it. I ran downstairs and told my parents, but they brushed it off and said I was probably half asleep, letting my imagination run wild. But I knew what I heard. I still know. After that, I made a habit of sleeping with the closet door shut. The second experience happened a few years later, late at night while everyone was winding down for bed. I was talking with my mom in her room when I noticed a tiny glass keepsake sitting on her dresser. It had a cork in the top, and inside was a folded newspaper clipping with a layer of ash-like dust. When I asked about it, she told me it held a small portion of her grandmother's ashes. Some of the family had each been given a little amount to keep. We talked about it for a while, and then I went to my room. Maybe 15 minutes later, just as I was settling in, I heard a soft knock at my bedroom door. It was light, but distinct enough that I got up and opened it. No one was there. I stood in the doorway for a second, staring into the hall, trying to make sense of it. Nothing moved. No one called out. It was just quiet. The third thing isn't really one moment. It's more like a feeling that never leaves. Anytime I'm alone in the basement, especially in the laundry room, I feel watched. It doesn't matter whether I'm switching clothes from the washer to the dryer or just grabbing something off a shelf. The feeling always creeps in the same way, like there's someone behind me, standing just outside my line of sight. I always turn around, and there's never anybody there. Still, the feeling is so strong that I can't ignore it. These days, whenever I go down there by myself, I play music or a video on my phone just to fill the silence. It helps a little. Not completely, but enough. The last experience happened pretty recently, only a couple of months ago, and honestly, it shook me more than anything else. It was the middle of the night, and I was in bed trying to fall asleep. My room was dark, and I'd had my eyes closed for a while. At one point, I opened them to check the time on my clock. I looked over, saw the time, and then rolled back onto my back. As I settled in, I glanced slightly to my right, and there was something standing beside my bed. It was dark, darker than the room itself, like a human-shaped shadow. I could make out the outline well enough to tell it was roughly my height, maybe even a little shorter. There were no features I could clearly see. No face, no eyes, nothing like that. Just the shape of a person standing there next to me. I didn't hesitate. I jumped out of bed and ran straight into the hall. My parents heard me and came out to see what was wrong. I told them what I'd seen, and I remember trying so hard to make them understand that I wasn't confused and I wasn't dreaming. I knew I had seen someone or something standing over me. I haven't seen that figure again since that night, but even now, living in that house still feels different sometimes. Not every day, not every hour, just in those quiet moments when the place seems to remember something I don't. And when that happens, I can't help feeling like maybe we've never really been alone there at all. I'm going to tell you this the way I remember it, starting with the encounter that still sits the heaviest in my chest and moving forward from there. The main presence in all of this is what I can only describe as an angel-like figure. I've had other strange experiences too, but this one has followed me through so many years that it's the one I keep coming back to. After a few encounters, I started calling her Lucia, just a small shift from the old name that felt closer to who she was to me. The first time I saw Lucia, I was 4 years old. I had gotten up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. The hallway outside my room was always lit because I was terrified of the dark, so I should have felt safe. But when I came out, I had this sudden, crushing feeling that something was watching me. You know that feeling when your body notices danger before your mind can explain it? It was like that. I looked toward the staircase, and there she was at the bottom. She was tall, far too tall for the house, with huge wings folded behind her, and something long in her hands that looked almost like a blade. Her whole form seemed drained of color, like she had been made from ash, shadow, and winter air. The only sound was this deep, rushing breath, like wind moving across an open field. She didn't really walk. She seemed to glide upward, slow and steady, and her eyes were darker than the rest of her, like empty spaces cut into a pale shape. I panicked. I ran to my mother's room, pounding on the door, crying, begging her to let me in because there was someone in the house. For years, I tried to tell myself it was just the kind of fear a little kid invents in the dark. But later, when I asked my mother about it, she remembered that night. She remembered me saying there was a tall figure in the house and how shaken I was. That memory stayed with her too. From about 6 to 8 years old, Lucia started appearing again, but in a different way. By then, I had been taken into another family, and that home was not a kind place. It was full of anger, fear, and the kind of tension that makes a child feel older than they are. During those years, she would stand in the corner of my room at night. Always the same corner, always silent. This time, though, she didn't scare me the way she had the first night. I could move. I could turn over in bed. I could pull the blanket tighter and pretend not to notice her, even though I always did. Around her there was this faint mist, bluish and greenish, like smoke catching moonlight. She would just stand there, watching. Not threatening, not comforting either exactly, just present. Someone I cared about later suggested maybe she had been some kind of guardian presence, maybe trying to absorb the ugliness around me or keep watch when no one else did. I still don't know what I believe. I only know that in the middle of all that pain, she kept showing up. When I was 14, I was living somewhere safer. That summer I was at camp, and during a quiet period when everyone was supposed to stay in their cabins, I snuck out because I was the kind of kid who always needed to be outside. I was walking through the woods near the ropes course when I noticed movement beside me in the trees. It was Lucia. She was gliding between the trunks, keeping pace with me. It was daytime, so for the first time I could really see her. Her wings looked dark at first, but underneath there was this deep blue sheen, like crow feathers catching light. Her face looked strangely young, younger than something ancient ought to look. The cloak around her was still dark and colorless, and that thin, drifting haze still hung around her. I I tried to get closer. I don't know whether that was courage or teenage foolishness, maybe both. But every time I stepped toward her, she moved back by the same amount, as if there was a distance she could never let me cross. Eventually, I gave up and turned back toward camp. She stayed beside me for a while, moving through the trees, and then she was simply gone before I reached the clearing. At 15, I saw her again while I was on a beach in Maine. It was late in the day, and I remember feeling unusually calm, almost peaceful, just standing there looking out at the water. When I turned, she was near a lamppost farther back from the shore, watching me. I started toward her, just a few steps, but she vanished almost immediately, like she had only meant to be seen and not approached. The next big encounter came when I was 18. By then, I had been struggling hard. I'd been using drugs for years and had already come too close to death more than once. I had just gotten out of treatment and was staying in a sober home. One night, I went out walking along a wooded bike path. There was a bridge there, and that's where she appeared again. I didn't want to deal with it. I turned around and headed back. But later, while I was on the phone with a friend, I saw her again outside the window. I remember freezing, then asking the friend if they could see anything. They said yes. They saw a figure and asked me what it was. I told them the truth, that I had seen her for years and still had no explanation. That ended up being one of the last conversations I ever had with that friend. We drifted apart after that. I can't tell you why that detail matters to me, only that it does. And now we get to what's happening lately, the reason I'm telling you any of this at all. For the past week, sleep has barely touched me. Every time I start to drift off, I end up in the same place. I'm standing on a frozen surface in total darkness. Beneath the ice is a single eye, impossibly huge, so large it makes everything human feel microscopic. And it is looking straight at me. Not upward, not around, at me. Directly at me. That's what unsettles me most. It doesn't feel like an ordinary dream. It feels like being observed. I wake up shaking with cold, with that awful sensation still clinging to me, like something crossed the line between sleep and waking and followed me back. And now Lucia is near again too. Not always fully visible, not for long, but enough that I know she's there. So that's where I am. I've told you as honestly as I can, and I've even altered a few small details in the telling, because memory is a living thing, and sometimes shifts when you hold it up to the light. But the heart of it is true. This presence has followed me from childhood into adulthood, through fear, abuse, recovery, and now, sleepless nights. I don't know what Lucia is. I don't know whether she wants something from me, whether she has been protecting me, warning me, or simply watching. I only know I'm tired, and I want one ordinary night of sleep. So last night, my friend and I tried something I still can't fully explain. He was on TikTok live with me, all the way in Portland, while I was in New York City. He had the Ouija board in front of him, and I had the EMF reader with me. We started carefully, opening the board only to neutral or kind spirits, just to be safe. The first spirit that came through gave us a name when we asked. It spelled out T. Gersinov. When we asked where he was from, it spelled something like risky, which made us think maybe Soviet or Russian. We searched for anything that matched, but found nothing. He did not seem to have much more to say, but while he was there, the EMF reader kept reacting. After a while, we said goodbye and opened the board again for any other spirit that wanted to speak. That is when everything changed. The EMF reader suddenly went wild, straight into the red, blinking over and over without stopping. We asked for a name, and the board kept moving between the same letters, spelling out Vova again and again. At first, We honestly thought it might just be a child spirit, almost playful, not really understanding what we were asking. We looked up the word afterward and only found a strange little coincidence, but nothing that really explained it. So we asked how old the spirit was. The planchette moved to 5. We asked again just to make sure, and it stayed there. That was the moment we realized we might really be talking to a child. Then I asked a question I truly wish I had left alone. The answer that came through was water. The second that word was spelled out, the whole atmosphere around me shifted. The EMF reader was going harder than it had the entire night, and the air around me turned freezing cold. I got chills instantly, and the back of my hand started prickling. I reached my hand out over the EMF reader, and I swear I felt something cold and damp against it, almost like a wet face. At the exact same time, my friend, miles away, said he was feeling chills too. That was enough for both of us. We ended the session right there, said goodbye, and put the board away. By then, I was starting to feel physically sick, nauseous, shaky, and completely drained. Whatever we had connected with, it felt deeply unsettling, and the sense we were left with was that this 5-year-old spirit had drowned. I still don't know what to make of it. I just know neither of us felt normal after that. Hello, my dear listeners. Have you been having trouble sleeping lately? Don't worry, I'm here to help. I'm going to share some mysterious stories with you to help you relax and drift off to sleep. You know, I truly love doing this. And by the way, thank you so much for sending me so many mysterious experiences. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss more mysterious stories. Good night. So, a while back, my friend Lena came to stay with us during a road trip she was taking with her new boyfriend. They'd stopped in Salem on the way, fully leaning into the Halloween mood, and picked up a couple of ghost hunting gadgets for a laugh. You know the kind. An EMF meter, a spirit box, all that stuff. When they got to the house, we spent ages messing around with everything. We walked those gadgets through the living room, the basement, up near the attic hatch, even around the fuse box, just to see if anything would happen. The spirit box gave us a bit of muffled radio noise here and there, but nothing that seemed meaningful, and the EMF meter barely reacted at all. Honestly, we were mostly just laughing at ourselves. It felt silly and harmless, and that was the whole fun of it. Later that night, we were all just lounging around, half tired, half wired, and Lena asked if I still had my tarot cards. I actually did. My mom had always loved anything paranormal, and years ago we'd tried figuring tarot out together. Neither of us ever became experts. We kind of decided tarot worked more like a mirror than magic, like therapy really. You see what you need to see in it. I've always been skeptical by nature, but in a curious way. I'm open-minded enough to admit it would be pretty amazing if there really was something more out there. So I dug out the old deck and the little guidebook that always came with me as backup. I still don't know all the meanings by heart, so that book is basically my comfort blanket. I started with Lena, laying out a few cards and checking the meanings as I went. And almost immediately, I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. Because the message I was getting, plain as day, was basically, this man sitting in your living room is not the one for her. It pointed to a relationship that wouldn't last, and some huge decision coming around Christmas. And in my head, I'm thinking, oh no, he's probably going to propose. She's going to want to say no. There is absolutely no way I can say any of that out loud. So I panicked. I did what any deeply unqualified fake tarot reader would do. I completely bottled it. I gave her some vague, fluffy nonsense instead, just enough to get through it without detonating the evening. Thought I'd got away with it. Then she smiled and said, "Do him next." And I thought, oh, come on. I've only just met this guy. But everyone was in good spirits, so I said fine and started laying out cards for him. The second I did, everything changed. One minute I was joking around, completely normal. The next, I felt absolutely awful. Not anxious in a vague way, physically awful. My head started pounding, my hands went clammy, and I felt this wave of sickness come over me so suddenly it was frightening. I remember thinking, brilliant. I'm about to have my first ever panic attack in front of my friend and her brand new boyfriend. Fantastic timing. I dropped my eyes to the guidebook, trying to focus, trying to find something, anything to say. But I couldn't. My mind just went blank. My head was throbbing harder and harder, and with every pulse, there was one word in my mind. Mum. Just that. Over and over. Mum. 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 I tried to speak around it, tried to say literally anything else, but I couldn't get the words out. It was the strangest feeling. I felt like my tongue had gone thick and heavy, like my mouth just would not cooperate. And the only word I could say, the only one that seemed allowed through was, Mum. And the instant I said it out loud, everything stopped. Just like that. I looked up, and Lena was staring at me with these huge, wide eyes, like she was on the verge of tears, asking if I was all right. And I was. By then, I really was, but only just. I told her I thought I might have had some kind of panic attack. Then she held up the EMF meter. Apparently, while I'd been having my little meltdown, she'd quietly switched it on. The needle was going wild. Absolutely buried in the red, jerking around at the top end. And she just looked at me and said, very calmly, "You are not yourself." We all kind of laughed, because what else do you do with something like that? It was too weird not to laugh. Her boyfriend, though, barely reacted. Just sat there like nothing had happened. Totally unreadable. So I tried to lighten the mood. I made a few jokes, looked up toward the ceiling like I was addressing the universe, and said, "All right then, if that was Mum, I'm sorry for making a mess of your message and nearly having a panic attack. But nice to meet you." He laughed. We all laughed. The tension broke a bit. And then, right at that moment, the spirit box, which Lena had turned back on, spoke. Clear as anything, in a woman's voice, it said, "Perfect." And that was the moment every single one of us completely lost it. So this happened in Southern California, a few years back. Back then, my old friend Marco and I had this habit of getting a little lit and hiking the trails after sunset. Out there, away from the traffic and noise, it honestly felt like meditation. Just quiet, darkness, and a chance to breathe. One evening, we parked near the trail lot right before the sun went down and walked maybe 3/4 of a mile in. We had a usual little spot we liked, nothing special, just a concrete retaining wall where we could sit and relax. The trail stretched ahead of us. There was a narrow creek off to the left, and on the right, there was this side path that didn't really go anywhere. Behind us, the main trail kept winding up the hill, and right behind the wall stood this tall tree that kind of loomed over the whole area. We got settled in, lit up, put on some low music, and just started talking. For the first half hour, everything felt normal, peaceful. No one else around, no movement, no voices, just the two of us sitting out there in the fading light. Then we heard it. At first, it sounded almost like someone calling out to a friend in the distance, kind of a drawn-out cooing sound. If you've spent enough time around LA, you know the kind of sound I mean. Marco and I both went quiet and started scanning the trail, expecting somebody to come walking toward us. But the sound didn't stay in one place. It started out ahead of us, then shifted off to the left, almost like it was moving in this strange zigzag pattern. We kept waiting to see a person, or an animal, or anything really, but there was nothing. And the closer it got, the weirder it sounded. Not like any owl or bird I'd ever heard. The only way I can describe it is like something between an injured owl and a completely unnatural imitation of one. It was off, deeply off. Like whatever was making it didn't fit the sound at all. By then, it was getting properly dark. The sound stopped for a moment, and everything went still. Then suddenly, right above our heads, from the tree behind us, this loud, sharp, drawn-out coo blasted down at us. I didn't even think. I just grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, pointed it straight up into the branches, and shouted, "Hello?" Nothing. No eyes reflecting back. No bird shifting in the leaves. No person. No animal. Just total silence. Marco had already slung his bag on and stepped forward like he was ready to bolt. Meanwhile, I had all my stuff spread out beside me. My notebook, water, everything. And I swear those 10 seconds it took me to throw it all into my bag felt way longer. I was standing right under that tree, right under whatever had made that sound, and after I yelled and shined the light up there, it never made another noise. That was the moment the whole thing stopped feeling weird and started feeling wrong. We took off running. Full sprint down that dirt trail, straight back to the cars, no stopping, no looking back. To this day, I'm still amazed neither of us ate it in the dark because we were moving fast. When we finally got back, we were standing there by the cars trying to make sense of it, doing that thing where you nervously laugh and keep asking, "What was that?" But even then, it wasn't over. There was a ditch in front of the parking area, full of brush and little trees, and from down in there, we suddenly heard this loud, aggressive snarl. That one could have been a raccoon or an opossum, sure, but at that point, it just felt like the place was telling us to leave. So we did. And whatever that was, I have never heard anything like it before or since. So yeah, that's one I still think about. And honestly, I still don't know what was in that tree. I'm a 31-year-old guy, and I was diagnosed with ADHD as an adult. I know that probably sounds unrelated at first, but it really does connect to what I'm about to tell you. For as long as I can remember, my mind has always been moving fast. I've dealt with the usual stuff: trouble focusing, constant thoughts bouncing around, moving a little awkwardly when I'm distracted, all of that. But there was also something else. Ever since I was young, I'd catch what looked like a person out of the corner of my eye. It would happen in the middle of ordinary moments. I'd be doing something, glance up, and for a split second, I'd think someone was standing there or walking past. Then I'd look straight at it, and there'd be nothing there. No one. Just empty space. When I was younger, I brought it up to my psychologist. He told me it could happen with ADHD, that my brain was trying to process too much at once, and sometimes it would sort of fill in the blanks. He said I'd probably grow out of it. I never did. What I did do was get used to it. Over time, it stopped feeling shocking and just became part of life. Weird, sure, but familiar. I stopped mentioning it. Honestly, it felt too strange to explain, so I mostly kept it to myself. A few years later, I met my wife, Mara. After we'd been together for a while, I finally told her about it. The conversation only came up because there had been a few times when I asked if she'd just walked into a room, and she'd say she hadn't even been nearby. After enough of those moments, she looked at me like, "Okay, why do you keep asking that?" So I told her, not in detail, just enough, that sometimes I thought I saw someone in my peripheral vision. I never really described it, and after that, we didn't talk about it again. Then, when we were both around 29, something happened. I had just gotten home from work and went into the kitchen to throw together something to eat. I heard Mara coming from the living room, and as I looked toward one doorway, I caught movement in the other one. That same familiar shape, that same passing figure. I turned toward it automatically, then looked back. Mara was standing in the opposite doorway, staring at me. And she asked, "Did you see that?" I remember just looking at her and saying, "See what?" She paused, like she wanted to say more, but then she brushed it off. And somehow, we both let it go. We never brought it up again. Until last night. It was around 1 in the morning. I woke up half asleep to use the bathroom. The bathroom is attached to our bedroom, and the bed faces the door. Mara was still awake, lying there, scrolling on her phone with the lamp turned low so I could get around without my glasses. I got up, headed toward the door, and there it was again. That shape. Same as always. At this point, I'm so used to it that I barely reacted. I just shifted around it without even thinking, went into the bathroom, came back, and got into bed. Then suddenly, Mara turned the light up and grabbed my arm. I was groggy, confused, trying to figure out what was going on. I had work in a few hours, so I really wasn't all there yet. But when I looked at her, she was pale, completely rattled, trying hard to keep it together, but scared. She looked right at me and said, in this shaky voice, "I saw it." And I asked, still half asleep, "Saw what?" That was the moment I fully woke up. Because the way she described it, it was exactly right. Exactly how I've seen it my whole life. And I had never described it to her like that. Not once. So now I don't really know what to think. When it was only me seeing it, I could write it off. I could live with it. I had lived with it. It had become background noise, basically. Creepy sometimes, sure, but manageable. But now she's seen it too. Now she's scared to be alone. She's talking about moving. And I don't even know how to explain to her that moving might not matter. Because this thing hasn't belonged to one house or one room. It's been with me for as long as I can remember. That's the part I can't stop thinking about. Not that she saw it. Not even that she described it perfectly. It's the fact that she said it was standing there, waiting by the door, waiting for me. I was in 6th grade when this happened, and even now, years later, I still can't really explain it in a way that makes sense. It was me and my 2 friends, Mason and Sarah, walking home after school one afternoon. We were cutting past the neighborhood park like we always did, when we saw this bunch of kids tearing out from that direction, full speed, like something had scared them half to death. At first, we thought maybe there was a fight or somebody got caught doing something stupid. But when we got closer, it was obvious they weren't coming from the playground or the basketball court. They were running from the woods behind the park. And because we were 12 and not nearly as smart as we thought we were, we decided to go look. We'd never really gone into those woods before. Everybody knew about them, though. There were always rumors. Old stories about high schoolers hanging out under this huge bridge back there, partying, doing drugs, whatever. But people had supposedly stopped going because they said squatters were living out there. At the time, that just sounded creepy enough to make it interesting, so we kept walking. We went deeper than I realized at the time, maybe close to a mile in, and eventually we found the bridge. It was massive, all concrete and rust and shadows underneath. The whole place felt abandoned in the worst way, like it had been left behind but was still somehow being watched. We moved farther under the bridge, and that's when we saw them. 3 symbols drawn on the ground, laid out like ritual circles with stars in the middle. I don't know what they actually were, but to a bunch of kids standing in the dark, they looked satanic. That's the only word I had for it then, and honestly, it's still the word that comes to mind now. The second we saw them, the mood changed. You know that feeling when your stomach drops and every part of you suddenly knows you shouldn't be there? That's what it felt like. None of us even argued. We just turned around and started heading back. Then a rock slammed against the side of the bridge. It was so loud it made all three of us jump. We spun around immediately, expecting to see someone there, but there was nothing. No movement, no voice, no one. That's when we ran. At first it felt normal, just blind panic, crashing through leaves and roots and branches. But after a while, something started to feel wrong. We should have made it out by then. Instead, every turn led to more trees, more dark, more nothing. We kept making random lefts and rights, trying to remember where we came from, until finally we stumbled into the same clearing again. The bridge. We had somehow made a full circle. By then it was getting late. I remember trying to call my mom, hands shaking so bad I almost dropped my phone, but there was no service. Mason checked his too, same thing. Our batteries were dying anyway. We were scared, trying not to show it, but it was obvious. The sun was gone, and the woods looked completely different at night. Then we started hearing something moving behind us. Not just in one direction either. Branches snapping from different sides, like something was circling us. Fast. Too fast. We kept turning around, trying to see through the dark, and then all at once I realized Sarah wasn't with us anymore. She was just gone. I remember yelling her name over and over. Mason was shouting too. We searched everywhere we could without really knowing where we were going. Every second felt longer than it should have. I don't know exactly how much time passed, maybe close to an hour, but it felt endless. And then we heard her scream. We thought she was dead for a second. I really did. We shook her, called her name, begged her to wake up, and eventually she opened her eyes. But she was not okay. Not even close. Sarah was always the bright one in our group, always laughing, always making everybody feel less scared. But in that moment she looked completely broken. She couldn't speak. She was trembling so hard her teeth were chattering, and her heart was pounding so visibly I could see it in her chest and throat. She curled up into herself and just stared, like whatever she'd seen had taken something out of her. We knew we couldn't stay there, so Mason helped her up and kept an arm around her while we kept moving. We didn't have a plan anymore. We were just walking, hoping the trees would finally open up. At one point, I heard a voice. It was low, quiet, almost like a whisper right near us. Leave. I stopped for half a second, but Mason said it was probably the wind, and honestly, I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. A few minutes later, we started hearing those sounds again. Rustling, snapping branches, movement from too many directions at once. And then I looked off to my left and saw it. There was a figure standing behind a tree, just barely visible, like it was leaning out enough for us to notice it. We ran immediately. I didn't think. I didn't say anything. I just ran. And I could hear it behind us. Heavy steps, branches cracking under its feet. Sarah started crying, over and over, saying, "Not again, not again, not again." And hearing that come from her made everything worse, because it meant something had happened while she was missing, something she never told us. We kept running until, out of nowhere, we saw the edge of the park. I have never felt relief like that in my life. We burst out of the woods and onto the grass, just gasping and stumbling, and then all three of us turned around. Standing at the tree line was this tall, shadowy figure, easily 7 feet, maybe more. It didn't move toward us. It just stood there, perfectly still, staring straight at us. And then it stepped back and disappeared into the dark. I'm 23 now, and I still think about that night more than I want to admit. None of us ever really talked about it afterward. Mason tried to act like it was just some messed up night in the woods, but even he never went back. And Sarah, whatever happened to her out there, it stayed with her. As for me, I've never stepped foot near that park again. Not once. And honestly, I don't think I ever will. I want to tell you something that still unsettles me, even now. And to be honest, I've never really been the kind of person who believes in paranormal stuff. I'm naturally skeptical. I always look for a rational explanation first. But every now and then, something happens that doesn't sit right with you, no matter how much you try to explain it away. This was one of those things. I hadn't thought about it in years. It was like my mind had tucked it away somewhere deep and decided not to revisit it. But not long ago, I was talking with someone, and the memory came rushing back so clearly that I got goosebumps all over again. That cold, prickly feeling just came right back. This happened a long time ago, when I used to babysit for my cousin's 2 girls. The older one, Mia, was maybe 7 or 8, and the younger one, Lila, was around 4. Lila was a very sensitive little kid. Every time her parents left, she'd get really upset and cry for hours. Sometimes she'd get frustrated and lash out too, but honestly, I mostly just felt sorry for her. She seemed deeply unhappy in a way I couldn't quite explain. They were living in a fairly new house at the time. It had only been built not too long before they moved in. Everything looked normal, clean, modern, bright during the day. But at night, that house felt different. It's hard to explain. There was just something off about it. Little noises, strange shadows in the corners. That quiet kind of atmosphere that makes you feel uneasy, even when nothing obvious is wrong. Usually, once the girls were asleep, I'd sit downstairs, watch TV, and check on them every so often. Mia's room was on the 2nd floor, and Lila's room was up on the 3rd. My cousin's bedroom was across the hall from Mia's. One night, after I'd been babysitting there for a while, something happened that I've never forgotten. I went upstairs to do my usual check. Mia was sound asleep, nothing unusual there. Then I went up to Lila's room. When I walked in, I stopped for a second because there was a chair sitting on top of her bed, and she was asleep curled up underneath it. It was odd, sure, but kids do strange things all the time, so I didn't think too much of it. I quietly lifted the chair off the bed, set it back where it belonged, and went downstairs. She never even stirred. A while later, I went up again. Same thing. The chair was back on the bed, and Lila was under it again. That's when I started feeling a little uneasy. I remember just standing there for a second, staring at it, trying to think of how that could have happened. But again, I took the chair down and left the room. Later on, I did one last check before her parents got home. And once again, the chair was on the bed. At that point, I was genuinely rattled. I didn't want to leave it in the room anymore, so I picked it up and carried it downstairs with me, thinking at least that would put an end to it. But as I came down the stairs, I suddenly got that unmistakable feeling that somebody was watching me. You know that feeling when the back of your neck tightens and every little instinct in your body goes on alert? That's exactly what happened. I turned my head and noticed that my cousin's bedroom door, across from Mia's room, was slightly open. Just barely. Only enough to leave a narrow crack. The room was dark, so I couldn't clearly see inside, but I had this overwhelming sense that there was someone standing there, looking directly at me. Then suddenly, the bedroom door slammed shut. Not slowly, not like it drifted on its own. It slammed. At that exact moment, Mia woke up and stepped out into the hallway, rubbing her eyes. So I knew it wasn't her. And I had just been upstairs with Lila, who was still asleep. I was terrified. I mean, truly terrified. I must have looked it too, because Mia took one look at me and asked what was wrong. Before I could even explain, she glanced toward her parents' room and gave me this look I still remember. It was this calm, knowing expression, like she already understood. Then she said, very matter-of-factly, that I didn't need to look in there. that it was better if I just went back downstairs. That made everything worse, because it didn't sound like a child imagining something. It sounded like someone who was already used to it. I asked her to come downstairs with me, and she did. I didn't want to be alone, not even for a second. Not too long after that, her parents came home. I got out of there, and I never babysat for them again. I did try to bring it up later with my cousin. More than once, actually. But every time, she'd brush it off and say something like, "I know, just leave it alone." And honestly, that's the part that still gets to me. Because what does that mean? What was going on in that house? Why did Mia seem to understand? Why did my cousin act like it was something already known, something not worth discussing? I still don't have an answer, and even now, thinking about that night gives me chills. So, I'm not really sure how this is going to sound out loud, and honestly, part of me still wonders if I'm just overthinking everything. I do have OCD, so I know my brain can latch onto things and make them feel bigger and heavier than they probably are. But this has stayed with me for so long that I finally felt like I needed to say it out loud to someone. A while back, I had this dream that genuinely unsettled me in a way I still can't explain. I've always had really vivid dreams, the kind that feel almost too real, like I've actually lived through them. And every now and then, I'll get these strange little flashes or feelings when I'm awake, like something is about to happen before it does. I don't really know what to make of any of that, and I'm not someone who knows much about paranormal stuff, so I've mostly just kept it to myself. In the dream, I was at this little off-campus house connected to my old university. It wasn't a place I'd ever actually been, but it felt familiar in that dream way, like my mind had built it out of pieces of real places. I remember starting out on the back porch with someone, and they kept urging me to come inside. Not aggressively, just insistently, like they really wanted me to see something. So eventually I went in with them. Inside, it felt like there was some kind of small gathering going on. Nothing wild, just a handful of people standing around, talking, moving from room to room. Some of them were people I recognized from real life, and some weren't. At first, everything felt normal enough. I was in one of the rooms chatting with a few people about completely ordinary things. And then my former advisor, though in the dream I'll call her Dr. Mara instead of her real name, walked over to a bookshelf and pulled out a book. She looked at me like she knew something I didn't, and asked whether I wanted to see my future, like my career, my life, where I was headed. And then, the dream shifted, the way dreams do, suddenly and without warning. All at once, everyone was looking for a different book. It was like the room changed emotionally before it changed visually. People got frantic. They were searching shelves, stacks, corners, drawers, everywhere. There was this feeling that the book mattered a lot, even though I didn't know why. At one point, they video called this older woman who seemed to know something about it, and she kept saying, almost casually, "It's in there, keep looking," like she was completely certain. Then, they found it. The second that book appeared in front of me, I felt this huge wave of dread. Just pure dread. I can still remember that feeling more clearly than some real memories. The book was large, very old-looking, and completely black. Not dark blue or brown black, just black. That alone felt strange. I love books. I own way too many, and there was something deeply wrong about the way this one looked. It had these metal details on the cover and spine, almost like clasps or bindings, like it was being sealed shut or reinforced somehow. It looked heavy, serious, almost ceremonial. And on the front, there was only one word: Archaon. Even saying that now makes me uncomfortable. I don't know why that word bothered me so much, but in the dream it felt charged, like I was looking at something I absolutely was not supposed to open or even know about. And right when I saw it, right at the peak of that horrible feeling, the dream ended. That would have been strange enough on its own, but what made it stick was what happened not too long after. It was black, and the second I really looked at it, I got hit with this awful flash of recognition. It wasn't exactly the same book from the dream, not perfectly, but it was close enough to make my stomach turn. I remember just standing there staring at it, feeling that same cold panic rising up again. I opened it and checked the first few pages, and the back pages too, searching for that word from the dream, hoping I wouldn't find it. I didn't. But even so, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something wrong with it. I ended up shoving it into a drawer where I kept gifts and random things I meant to deal with later, and it stayed there for months. Every time I remembered it was there, I felt uneasy. Eventually, I took it out and got rid of it. I know that probably sounds dramatic, but I was honestly scared of it by that point. It felt cursed, or at least tied to something I didn't understand and didn't want near me. And then there was the part that made everything feel even stranger. Around that same time, my dad, who is deeply religious, more than I am, had a disturbing dream of his own. In his dream, he walked up to a house where some kind of gathering was happening and knocked on the door. When the door opened, it was the devil standing there. Now, my dad is the kind of person who avoids anything even remotely connected to that kind of imagery, so for him to have a dream like that was completely out of character. It rattled him. And what really got to me was that his dream happened either the same night as mine or within a day of it. Very close together. My mom may have dreamed something odd too, but she almost never remembers her dreams long enough to say. So ever since then, I've had this lingering feeling that there was some meaning to it, or at least some connection I can't explain. Maybe there isn't. Maybe it was just a vivid dream that collided with coincidence and my own anxiety. I know that's possible. But even now, when I think about that house, that search, that black book, and that single word on the cover, I get the same chill I felt in the dream. I still don't know what it was supposed to represent. I don't know why it felt so forbidden, or why finding that real book afterwards scared me as much as it did. I just know the whole thing has been sitting heavy with me ever since, and I've never really known who to tell. So I guess I'm saying it now exactly the way it's been living in my mind. Confusing, unsettling, and impossible to fully shake. So I need to tell you about something that happened, because even now, it feels too meaningful to keep to myself. A few nights ago, I had a dream. I was sitting in my grandmother's sitting room with her. There were other people there too. Soft, indistinct shapes I somehow recognized as relatives. Maybe cousins, maybe aunts and uncles. But they faded into the background. What stood out clearly was the room, and her. She looked at me with those bright gray-blue eyes and asked very simply, "Why don't you come see me anymore?" And the truth is, that question cut straight through me. She wasn't just my grandmother. She was also my godmother, and in many ways, she felt like a second mother to me. We'd always been deeply close. But after her partner died years ago, she moved in with one of her sons so she wouldn't be alone. Over time, that home became a hard place to walk into. The atmosphere felt cold, uncomfortable, heavy. I live in another country, so at first I still visited often. Then every few months, then less and less. Eventually, I think part of me just shut down emotionally because it hurt too much. So in the dream, I answered her honestly. I said, "Grandma, of course I want to see you, but when I come, I feel like I shouldn't be there. I feel like a burden. It never feels warm or welcoming. In another situation, I'd come see you all the time." At first, she looked serious, but then her face softened. She gave me this gentle, knowing smile and said, Yes, I understand." Then I woke up. It was 3 in the morning. I almost never remember my dreams, so this already felt unusual. I lay there for a while, thinking about it, and then drifted back to sleep. At 5:30, my father called me, crying. My grandmother, my godmother, had passed away around 2:30 that morning. It was sudden. Her heart gave out while she was getting up during the night. They found her later, and by the time help arrived, there was nothing anyone could do. The moment I heard, the dream came flooding back in full. And honestly, in that instant, I knew. She had come to me before she left. We hadn't been able to have that conversation in life, so she found another way. She said what she needed to say, and I said what I needed to say. We understood each other. We made peace. That's why, as strange as it may sound, I don't feel consumed by guilt. I feel sad, of course, but underneath that, I feel calm, deeply calm. I truly believe she came to say goodbye and to let me know that we were okay. And then, as if that weren't enough, later that morning, around 7, I said out loud, half teasing, half sincere, "All right, Grandma, if that was really you, send me one more sign." I had barely finished speaking when the TV in the background announced, "And today, we celebrate Grandmother's Day." I just froze. Then I started laughing. I looked up and said, "Okay, message received, loud and clear. Love you, Moraine. Rest easy." So I have this pair of rings I've worn since I was about 14, and at this point, they've been with me for nearly 3 decades. They mean a lot to me, so much so that I almost never take them off. The other morning, I left the house really early, and while I was driving, I suddenly realized my rings weren't on my fingers. My stomach just dropped. I had no idea where they could have gone, and I immediately started panicking. When I got back, I searched everywhere I could think of. I looked under furniture, behind the bed, in the bathroom, in the kitchen, in the trash, in my car, and even outside around the porch and yard. I checked every place that made sense, and when nothing turned up, I got more and more upset. Now, my grandmother passed away years ago, but I've always had this feeling that she still helps me find things when they go missing. I know that might sound strange to some people, but in that moment, I stopped and quietly asked her to help me bring the rings back. After that, I kept searching, but this time I started looking in places that honestly didn't make much sense, and somehow, that's exactly what led me to them. I found my rings sitting on a windowsill in a part of the house I barely even use, except maybe once in a while to tend to a plant or open the blinds. I hadn't been over there recently at all. I still can't explain why I would have taken them off there. Unless I was sleepwalking or something, it just doesn't add up. But deep down, I really feel like my grandma helped me. And this isn't the first time I felt that way. Years ago, when I was in my early 20s, I was with a longtime boyfriend, and on my birthday he took me out to dinner. That night, I wore this necklace that had belonged to my grandmother. It was delicate, a little long, and really special to me. On the drive home, we pulled off somewhere private and ended up fooling around in the car. Before that, I remember taking off the necklace because I didn't want it to get tangled or broken. I was sure I had tucked it into my purse. But later, when I reached for it, it was gone. We tore the car apart looking for it. I searched everywhere, under the seats, between the cushions, in every pocket of my bag. Nothing. I went home completely heartbroken, convinced I had lost something I could never replace. Then, a few months later, I was standing in my parents' room talking with my mom, and I happened to glance at the closet door. Hanging there was the necklace. I just stared at it. I asked my mom where she found it, and she told me she hadn't found it at all. It had just appeared there one day, and she assumed it belonged to either me or my sister. To this day, I cannot explain how that necklace could have gone from the car that night to my parents' bedroom closet. It makes no logical sense to me. And honestly, that's exactly how I feel about the rings showing up on the windowsill. Maybe there's a simple explanation. Maybe there isn't. All I know is that in both moments, when something precious was missing and I felt helpless, it somehow found its way back to me. And in my heart, it feels like my grandma still looks out for me. So this happened when I was about 6, sometime in the mid-90s, and I still remember it like it happened yesterday. I was curled up in my mom's bedroom late at night, watching TV with her while the rest of the house had gone completely still. The screen was the only real light in the room, throwing those soft, flickering shadows across the walls. We were watching one of those goofy home video shows, laughing together, and for a while everything felt normal. Cozy even. Back then, we were living at my grandma's old house. It had that kind of heavy nighttime quiet that makes every tiny sound feel bigger than it is. The floorboards creaked, the air always smelled a little dusty, and the whole place had this strange, worn-down feeling to it, like it was carrying 100 stories it hadn't told yet. At some point, I got up to go to the bathroom. I stepped out into the hallway, and the wood floor was cold under my feet. The living room was off to my left, almost completely dark except for a little bit of moonlight slipping in through the curtains. Now, my grandma had this habit of sleeping on the couch instead of in her bed. She used to say she hated sleeping in the bedroom, though as a kid I never really understood why. So there she was, asleep against the wall, snoring softly like always. And then I saw him. I just froze. It looked like a man was coming straight out of the wall, not opening a door, not stepping around anything, just moving through it. He passed right through my grandma like she wasn't even there, and kept going across the room. He was tall, really tall to my little kid eyes, and he had on this old-fashioned hat, more like a dark fedora than anything else, and a long coat that hung off him in this strange way. But the part I can never forget, the part that still gets under my skin, was what he was made of. He didn't look solid. He looked like television static. Not like a normal person, not like a shadow. His whole body had that grainy, flickering black and white look, like a dead channel on an old TV. It was almost like the air around him was buzzing. I remember staring and thinking, this can't be real. I actually pinched myself because I thought maybe I was dreaming, but I wasn't. He kept moving, calm and deliberate, crossed the room, stepped up onto the little side table near the couch, and then just disappeared through the opposite wall. Just like that. I was absolutely terrified. I wet myself right there in the hallway because I was too scared to move. Then I finally snapped out of it and ran back to my mom's room, crying so hard I could barely talk. I jumped into the bed and yelled, "Mom! Mom! There's a man in the living room!" She sat straight up, startled, and asked me what I was talking about. I was sobbing, trying to explain this man made of static, with the hat and the coat, walking through the walls like it was the most natural thing in the world. My mom took my hand and walked with me back down the hall. I remember that walk feeling so much longer than it really was. When we got to the living room, my grandma was still asleep on the couch like nothing had happened. My mom turned on the lamp beside her, and the light woke her up. Then my mom told her what I'd seen. And my grandma just looked at me with this calm little smile, like none of it surprised her at all. She said, "Sweetheart, that was your grandfather. He used to wear that hat and coat whenever he went out at night to have a drink." And there he was. Same face, same coat, same hat. I remember just staring at that picture, feeling cold all over, because I knew what I'd seen. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't made it up. Somehow, that night, I saw someone from my own family who was supposed to be gone. And honestly, even now, I still don't have a good explanation for it. I just know that for one brief moment in that old house, the dead didn't feel very far away at all. I've had sleep paralysis before, but there are two experiences that have stayed with me in a way I still can't really shake. The first time happened in early spring of 2021, just after sunrise, somewhere around 6:30 in the morning. I was asleep, and as I started trying to wake up, I slipped straight into that awful in-between state where your mind is alert, but your body won't move. It felt like I was fighting to pull myself awake, blinking hard, trying not to sink back under. And then, in those blinks, I saw them. There were 4, maybe 5, small gray beings in my room. 2 of them were right up close to my face, one on either side, and at least 2 more were standing near the foot of the bed, just watching me. I have this faint memory that there may have been another one standing off in the far right corner, but that part is less clear. One of the ones near me seemed to be holding something, some kind of object, and it was close to my face or chest. I still couldn't tell what it was. What I remember most clearly is the way they reacted when I started fighting the paralysis. They looked startled, almost panicked, like they hadn't expected me to be aware of them. One of them, on my left side, moved suddenly and sharply, almost like it jerked back toward the window beside my bed. And through all of it, I had this intense sensation that I was lifting, like my body was floating even though I was still trapped there. After what felt like forever, maybe a minute or 2, I finally managed to move again. I sat straight up in bed, blinking, trying to get my bearings. And just like that, they were gone. At the time, I didn't let myself dwell on it too much. I'd never fully believed in aliens, and I told myself maybe it was just a one-time thing, some terrifying sleep paralysis hallucination that happened to feel more real than anything I'd ever experienced. But then it happened again. This was in 2026, just a couple of nights ago, around 1 in the morning. Same kind of beginning. I woke into sleep paralysis, completely still, fully aware. But this time, it was different. There was only one figure. This one was taller than the others had been, more medium height, and something about the presence felt different too. I got the strange impression it might have been female, though I know that sounds ridiculous, and honestly, I have no idea whether that even makes sense. It was wearing something that looked like a dark fitted suit, almost like a flight uniform, and unlike the others, it didn't seem alarmed at all. It was calm. It just stood at the end of my bed, staring at me in this steady, focused way, almost as if it was observing me, studying me. What surprised me was that I didn't panic the same way I had the first time. I didn't struggle to break out of it. I just looked back. I couldn't move, but I stayed there, completely locked in, staring at this being while it stared at me. And behind it, somehow, there was what looked like a UFO in my room, as if it had simply appeared there. That part had never happened before. We stayed like that for about a minute, maybe a little longer. Then I blinked, and it was gone. The room was empty, the paralysis lifted. I sat up in bed again, heart racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. This happened close to a year ago, maybe a little less. It was around the end of 9th grade, right before finals, on a school night. Back then, my sleep schedule was completely wrecked. Where I live, we have to get up ridiculously early for school, around 5 in the morning, and I was the kind of person who would still be awake at 1 or 2 a.m., running on maybe 3 hours of sleep if I was lucky. That night, I remember feeling off. Not exactly sad, not exactly angry, just wrong. Restless, heavy. Around 1:30 in the morning, I was lying in bed, scrolling through YouTube, trying to distract myself. To make sense of what happened, I need to explain the layout a little. Right outside my bedroom was this small sitting area with a huge frosted window, maybe 7 feet tall. It didn't have curtains, so even though you couldn't clearly see through it, it still gave off this strange, exposed feeling at night. If you stood in that space facing away from the window, my bedroom door was right behind you. Inside my room, my bed sat a little way in from the door, and there were 2 windows along the wall near the foot of the bed. The room itself wasn't huge, just enough for the bed and a bit of walking space. I always sleep with the curtains shut and the room completely dark. I hate sleeping with lights on, but for a few nights before this happened, I'd already been feeling uneasy in that room. That kind of fear you can't explain, like the space itself felt wrong, like I wasn't supposed to be there. Anyway, sometime around 2 a.m., I came across this video called something like, "How to Make Yourself Faint." And because I was tired, bored, and clearly not thinking straight, I decided to try it. The video said to lie down, take 40 deep breaths, and then on the last one, stand up quickly and try to inhale hard. So I sat on the edge of my bed, thinking if anything happened, I'd just fall back onto the mattress. I followed the instructions, and on that last breath, everything got strange. I didn't black out exactly, but I went into this awful fog. It felt like my brain had slipped sideways, like I wasn't fully there anymore. For a second, I couldn't tell what I was feeling or even where I was. Then it was almost like time skipped. The best way I can describe it is that weird sensation of suddenly realizing time has passed after you fall asleep. Except I was still sitting there. When I came to, my vision was blurry. My room lights were still on, just like I'd left them. As things started to come back into focus, my body began jerking and trembling, and I couldn't control it. It felt like that intense pins and needles sensation when your leg falls asleep, except it was my whole body. After maybe 15 seconds, it stopped. I just sat there, stunned, thinking, what was that? At that point, I decided, okay, enough. I shut off the lights, pulled the curtains closed, and tried to go to sleep. But the fear that had been lingering the past few nights got so much worse. It was overwhelming. I usually fall asleep to scary stories or white noise, but that night I switched to a prayer because I was too freaked out to listen to anything else. Eventually, it calmed me down enough that I drifted off. And then almost immediately, I was dreaming. Or at least, I thought I was. In the dream, I was still in my room. It was dark, exactly the way I'd left it. But I instantly felt that same presence again, only stronger now, like something was standing just outside my room, watching, waiting. Then my focus shifted to the doorway, and there was this woman standing there. But her eyes were not human. They were huge, unnaturally wide, and the whites were this deep, textured red, almost like stone. Her pupils were yellow, sharp and reptile-like, and she was smiling at me. Not kindly, not gently. It was this stretched, taunting smile, like she could see exactly how terrified I was and was enjoying it. Behind her, through the frosted light from outside, was this eerie blue glow, almost like exaggerated moonlight. Everything about it felt theatrical and horrible. The second I saw her, I shut my eyes in the dream. I was lying in bed facing the door, and even with my eyes closed, I could feel her come into the room. That's when I tried to move, and I couldn't. Not even a little. That was the worst part. I fought with everything I had to sit up, to scream, to move my arms, anything. But my body just wouldn't respond. It felt like being trapped inside myself. I kept my eyes squeezed shut and started begging myself to wake up. Then I felt hands on me. Actual hands. I felt my body being shaken, like someone was trying to wake me up fast. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was in my throat, I was panicking, praying, trying to think of anything safe, and for some reason I thought of my grandma, my real grandma, and held on to that as hard as I could. And then I heard her voice, right in my ear, clear as anything. She said in her language something like, "Hey, kiddo, it's me, Grandma." It sounded exactly like her. Same tone, same softness, the way she used to comfort me. And somehow, even in that terror, it calmed me a little. After that, everything gets blurry. I don't remember exactly how it ended. I just know I woke up at 5 a.m., completely terrified, fully convinced that something evil had tried to get into me that night. And honestly, even now, remembering it still gives me chills. Let me tell you about the first really strange thing that ever happened to me in that house. This was back around the summer of 2016, maybe late June or early July. We lived way out in rural Wisconsin, a good half-hour from the nearest town, surrounded by woods and open land. A lot of unsettling things happened in that house over the years, but this was the first one that really stayed with me. I woke up really early one morning, somewhere around 4:30, maybe 5. It was that in-between time of day when it's not fully night anymore, but the sun still hasn't come up. The sky outside had just started turning that pale blue-gray color, and inside the house everything looked like shadows and outlines. From my bed, I could see through my bedroom door into part of the living room. I remember sitting up, still half asleep, and just staring out there. At first, I didn't even know what I was looking at. I just had this weird feeling that something wasn't right, and I couldn't pull my eyes away. After a few seconds, I laid back down and tried to shake it off, but that feeling only got stronger. So I sat up again and looked toward the living room one more time. That's when I saw it. In the corner of the room, we had this old rocking chair, and there was someone sitting in it. I know how that sounds, and I know it sounds like every creepy story you've ever heard, but I'm telling you exactly what I saw. The room was still dark enough that I couldn't make out details clearly, so all I could really see was the shape of a person. Just a dark figure in the chair, outlined by the faint light coming through the windows behind it. But I could see the head. That's the part I remember most clearly. It rose above the back of the chair, and it looked smooth, almost bald. I just stared at it. That was the weirdest part. I wasn't screaming, I wasn't frozen in pure terror, but I also wasn't okay. It was more like this heavy, unnatural feeling that kept me locked on it. I genuinely felt like I couldn't look away. My younger brother Mason was asleep in the bed across from me the whole time. He didn't move once. And I remember thinking, more than anything, that I didn't want whatever was out there to notice either of us. So I got up, walked over, and quietly shut the bedroom door. That was it. No huge dramatic moment, no footsteps, no voice. It just felt like the only thing I could do. Then I laid back down and listened. I stayed there for a long time, wide awake, waiting to hear something, anything. A creak, a footstep, the rocking chair moving, whatever. But the house was completely silent. Not one sound. At some point, I must have fallen back asleep, because when I woke up again a couple hours later, everything was normal. The house was busy, people were up, morning had started like usual. Later, I told my mom what I'd seen. She didn't seem too concerned. She told me I probably saw the pattern on the blanket draped over the chair, and that my mind filled in the rest. She said it might have looked like my grandmother's face or something in the low light. Then she added that, for some reason, she'd actually slept on the couch in the living room that night. I remember thinking she completely misunderstood me, but I didn't push it. Because I know what I saw. It wasn't a face in a blanket. It wasn't a trick of the light. There was someone, or something, sitting in that chair. I could see the shape of its head above the backrest. It was real enough that I still remember exactly how wrong it felt. Nothing big happened right after that, but more strange things came later. Looking back, that morning felt like the beginning of it all. I've always been somewhere in the middle when it comes to paranormal stuff. I'm open to the idea that ghosts or darker things might exist, but I also think most stories people tell have a normal explanation, or they're just made up. That's how I felt before this happened, and honestly, it's still how I feel now. But there is one experience I've never been able to explain away. This happened around 12 years ago, in the middle of winter. My parents and I had gone to visit my Aunt Lena's grave on the anniversary of her passing. We went late in the day because my parents had both been working, so by the time we got there, the cemetery was only a few minutes from closing. It was just before 5. Not especially late, but in winter it was already getting dim. That gray-blue kind of evening where everything feels quieter than usual. The place was almost empty by then. We'd spent a little while at the grave, and the three of us had just turned to head back to the car when we noticed a woman walking some distance away. What struck us immediately was that none of us had seen her before. She wasn't far enough away that we should have missed her. The cemetery grounds in that section were flat and open, and there really wasn't anywhere she could have come from without us noticing. I don't think any of us said the word ghost in that moment, but there was this strange feeling, like something about it was off. So we kept watching her. She walked for maybe 10 seconds or so, just moving at a normal pace, and then she was gone. Not hidden, not blocked from view, just gone. I know how that sounds, and I'm not claiming I can prove it. I'm only telling you exactly what I saw, and I am completely convinced that this woman vanished right in front of us. 1 second she was there, and the next second she wasn't. My mom is one of the calmest people I know, and even she reacted. She didn't scream or anything, but she definitely got rattled. I still remember her blurting out, "What the hell was that?" And then, "Are you kidding me right now?" She was trying to make sense of it, but you could hear in her voice that she was shaken. My dad handled it differently. Looking back, I think he was more unsettled than he wanted to admit. At the time, he gave this awkward little laugh and said something like, "Well, that was strange. Maybe we just saw a ghost." Then he immediately followed it up with some joke about how we needed to leave before the shopping center parking lot got more terrifying than the cemetery. We were planning to stop and pick up a few Christmas gifts afterward, and I think he was trying to steer us back into normal life as quickly as possible. But the thing is, all three of us saw it. That's what has stayed with me all these years. If it had just been me, I probably would have talked myself out of it by now. I would have assumed the light was weird, or I was tired, or I just filled in the blanks wrong. But it wasn't only me. My parents saw the same woman in the same place disappear at the same moment. I don't. But I do believe something happened in that cemetery that evening, and to this day, I can't explain it. I'm not really the kind of person who jumps straight to ghosts or the paranormal, but honestly, after everything that happened growing up, I still can't come up with a better explanation. The first strange thing I can remember happened when I was about 9. There was some kind of moon event that night, maybe an eclipse, maybe something else, and I had gone outside to look at it before heading back in for bed. Everything felt normal at first. My room was quiet, the house was still, and then out of nowhere, I heard whistling. And not normal whistling either. It sounded distant, eerie, almost like someone was trying to get my attention without being seen. The weird part is, it couldn't have been neighbors. We lived way out in the country, down this long gravel road with woods all around us. The nearest house wasn't close enough for that. I remember looking out my window and seeing absolutely nothing. No movement, no person, nothing. The whistling would come back every now and then, and every time it did, it made my skin crawl. But that wasn't even the part that scared me the most. Some nights, when I was trying to fall asleep, I'd hear drums. We never had drums in the house, and none of my brothers or sisters played anything like that. It was this low, rhythmic beating that sounded almost ceremonial, and hearing it late at night made everything feel wrong. It's hard to explain, but it didn't sound like noise from far away. It sounded close. Too close. The worst thing, though, the thing I still think about, was the whispering outside my window. My bed was set up right next to it, just because that was where it fit best. And every once in a while, I'd be lying there in the dark, and the whole room would be silent. Like someone was standing just outside, whispering words I couldn't quite make out. Not loud enough to understand, but clear enough to know they were there. That terrified me more than anything else. What really gets me is that it wasn't just me. My dad, Rowan, used to talk about how that place always felt off. He'd say that whenever he was out near the tree line, he had this constant feeling that something was watching him. He mentioned hearing movement in the leaves, little rustling sounds, like something was staying just out of sight. And honestly, I understood exactly what he meant. I felt it too. One morning, years later, I woke up really early for work, before sunrise, and immediately felt like something was in the room with me. I know that probably sounds dramatic, but I don't mean I was just nervous or half asleep. I mean I felt a presence, a real one, heavy, aware, like it knew I was awake. And whatever it was, it did not feel harmless. It felt deeply wrong, almost hateful. I had never felt anything like that before, and strangely, I never felt it again after that one morning. That land has been in my family for generations, close to 100 years now, and even before that it was just old, untouched ground. A lot of history could be tied to a place like that. I've wondered before if maybe people lived there long before my family ever did. I don't really know enough about spirits or hauntings or any of that to say what it could have been. All I know is, I didn't used to believe in this kind of thing. Now, I'm not so sure anymore. I've only recently started talking about the stranger things that happened to me growing up. For a long time, it just felt pointless. People either laughed, tried to explain it away, or acted like they understood when they really didn't. I'm not trying to convince anyone anymore. I guess I'm just hoping to share it with people who are willing to listen. When I was younger, my friends and I used to wander through abandoned places out in rural Nebraska. At first, it was just the thrill of exploring old, forgotten houses and barns. But after enough weird things started happening, we half-jokingly started calling it ghost hunting. Not exactly creative, but it stuck. There was one house in particular that never left me. It sat way back from a dirt road, so far out that at night it felt like it barely existed. When you stepped through the front door, there was a small kitchen off to the left, and through a narrow opening on the right was the living room. The place was mostly bare, almost stripped clean, except for a few cabinets still hanging crooked on the walls, and this one old armchair sitting in the middle of the kitchen, like someone had carefully placed it there. And on the arm of that chair was a book. It was huge. I mean, absurdly huge. Thick, heavy, packed with page after page. We brushed the dust off and realized it was an old Connect the Dots book. I remember laughing because it was so strange. This giant book, filled with hundreds of nearly identical puzzles, just sitting there in an abandoned farmhouse. We took it with us, mostly as a joke. On the drive back, my friend Mara sat in the back seat doing a few of the puzzles with a pen she found in my center console. After I dropped everyone off, I forgot the book was still in my car. Over the next few days, I kept noticing it in the back seat whenever I glanced behind me. Then by Friday, after work, I decided I should finally clean the car out and toss it. But when I opened the back door, the book was gone. Just gone. My car stayed locked most of the time, and I was pretty obsessive about that, so the only explanation I could come up with was that maybe one of the doors hadn't latched properly and someone took it. It didn't really make sense, but I wasn't that upset about it. I probably would have thrown it out anyway. Still, I texted Mara and asked if by any chance she'd left it there on purpose, or maybe come back for it. She said no, of course not. So I told her it had disappeared, and that kicked off a whole conversation about the house again. The more we talked, the more uneasy I felt. By that night, we decided to drive back out there and take another look. We went in through the same front door, same little kitchen, same opening to the living room, same silence. And there, in the middle of the kitchen, was the same armchair, with the same giant book resting on the arm. I remember us just staring at it for a second. Then we walked over, picked it up, and wiped the dust from the cover again like we were hoping we were wrong somehow. I laughed, but it came out shaky that time. Not amused, more like my brain didn't know what else to do. We flipped through the pages. Every single puzzle was blank. Not one pen mark, not one line, nothing. The pages Mara had filled in on the drive home were clean, like no one had ever touched them. What makes it even stranger is that we went back to that house more than once after that, and we never saw the book again. Not on the chair, not on the floor, nowhere. It was like it had shown up twice and then decided that was enough. I still can't explain it. I don't know where the book went when it was in my car, and I definitely don't know how it ended up back in that house looking untouched. Of all the things I saw in those years, that's still one of the most baffling. And honestly, it's the kind of thing that stays with you. Not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it made absolutely no sense at all. I've worked some eerie jobs in my life, but one of the strangest was doing night patrols as a security officer for NSC. Most nights were equal parts interesting and unsettling, and over the years I saw enough odd things that I usually kept my mouth shut. Partly because I didn't want people thinking I was making things up, and partly because I didn't want to risk my job. But this story is different. I wasn't alone. 3 other people were there that night, and every one of us walked away shaken. Let me set it up for you. Back then, I was doing patrols around Beresfield and Thornton. The way the shift worked was simple enough. One officer started at Beresfield at 6 p.m., and another started at Thornton at the same time. Then around midnight, we'd swap locations and finish the other person's patrol. It was just the routine. Creepy routine, sure, but routine all the same. So on this particular night, sometime after 1 a.m., I was on the Thornton side when I got a call from the other guard, a guy I'll call Terry. His voice had that edge to it that told me right away something wasn't normal. He said he needed me over at the school in Beresfield, and I told him I'd be there in 5 minutes. When I pulled up, Terry was arriving too, and sitting there already was a police vehicle. 2 officers stepped out, and for a split second, Terry and I made some dumb joke to each other, just trying to lighten the mood. But once the officers started explaining why they were there, the joking stopped pretty quickly. They told us the local station had received a call from one of the classrooms in the school, Classroom 6, around 12:45 in the morning. Not a normal call either. When someone answered it, all they heard was a child giggling. That alone would have been enough to unsettle anyone, but in the background there was this soft, tinkling music, like the kind that comes from an old jewelry box with a little ballerina turning inside. I've never liked that sound, not even as a kid. There's just something about it that gets under your skin. The sergeant apparently thought maybe a child had somehow been locked in or left behind, so he sent the officers out to check. Now, this school was fully fenced. Tall black fencing, pointed spikes on top. Not the kind of place you just casually wander into. Terry unlocked the gate, and the four of us headed inside together. We walked through the main glass doors into the front hall. Offices lined both sides, and at the end of the corridor was the main office, where the internal phone system connected to all the classrooms. Then, the second we stepped into that office, the phone rang. Not only rang, it lit up, and the display clearly showed Classroom 6. I remember every one of us freezing for a second. One of the officers said she'd answer it. She picked up, listened, and I watched the color drain right out of her face. Then she said, very quietly, "It's the kid giggling, and the music's playing again." That was enough for me. I said I'd go check Classroom 6, and before anyone could stop me, I was already moving. I ran down the corridor, out through the glass doors, and straight toward the room. The windows stretched across the classroom wall, so I glanced in first. Nothing. No movement. No child. I opened the door and stepped inside, and I can still remember exactly how that felt. The air in that room hit me like ice. Every hair on my body stood up. I had goosebumps everywhere. It wasn't just fear. It was that horrible, instinctive feeling that something was deeply wrong. I turned and looked back toward the office through the glass, and I could see Terry and the two officers staring at me, wide-eyed, waiting. Then I noticed something odd. There was no phone on the teacher's desk. That didn't make sense. This was supposed to be the room making the calls. I looked closer and spotted a phone cord running toward one of the wall cupboards. I opened it, half expecting, honestly, dreading, that I might find a child hidden inside. Instead, there was the phone, tucked away inside the cupboard, and it was off the hook. I could hear the dial tone coming from it. I just stood there staring at it for a second, feeling sick. Then I put the receiver back in place. And that's when I noticed the folding divider wall between Classroom 6 and the room next door. I slid it open just enough to squeeze through into Classroom 5. The moment I stepped in there, the same feeling hit me again, stronger somehow. My whole body tensed. I didn't even finish checking properly. I backed out, shut the divider, hurried out of Classroom 6, slammed the door behind me, and made it back to the office faster than I'd like to admit. I told them exactly what I'd found, and to my surprise, the two officers looked at each other and basically said, "Nope, we're done." They were genuinely rattled. One of them said they were leaving the rest to us. I remember blurting out something like, "That's nice, you've got guns and we've got flashlights." But they were already mentally out the door. One officer's radio crackled, and the sergeant asked for an update on the school call. She told him they'd explain when they got back to the station because they didn't want the rest of the officers hearing it over the radio and taking the piss out of them. He agreed. Then they left. So there it was, just Terry and me. We looked at each other, both of us trying to act steadier than we were, and decided we had to do one more full sweep of the classrooms together. So we did. All 6 rooms. Thoroughly. Nothing. No child, no intruder, no explanation. Once we'd locked everything up, we stood outside Classroom 6, both of us shaking a little, both needing a smoke. We lit up and just stood there in silence for a second, trying to process what had happened. And then, from directly inside Classroom 6 behind us, came this enormous bang. Not a creak, not a tap, a proper bang. That was it. We didn't hesitate. We ran. Absolutely ran for our lives, locked the place up as fast as we could, got to our patrol cars, and drove out of there. A few minutes later, we pulled into a service station and just sat there talking, going over every detail again and again, trying to make sense of it. We never could. And I'm telling you now exactly as I remember it, because that night stayed with me. It still does. This happened sometime after 2010, and I've had more strange experiences in my life than I can count. Enough that I could tell you story after story. Some of them go all the way back to when I was barely old enough to talk. The first thing I ever tried to describe as a child, apparently, was something I just called the eyes. That was all I could say. The eyes. My parents never understood what I meant. Honestly, I'm not sure I ever did either. But that night at the school, that one was real. 4 of us were there. 4 of us heard enough, saw enough, and felt enough to know something wasn't right. And I truly hope you never experience anything like it for yourself.